Committee. For those of you who have not previously attended this committee, I would like to outline the running order for you for today. After we have had apologies, members' interest, minutes, and a few updates, we will move to the substantive items for consideration today. At which point I will ask those who are making a deputation to come to the table ready to make their deputations. The sequence will be that I will ask the officers who are in charge of the particular applications to outline the applications for us. Then the deputies, starting with local deputies, finishing with any councillor who is making a deputation, will have between them 12 minutes each. 12 minutes between the deputies in favour, 12 minutes for the deputies against, and 6 minutes for any councillor who wishes to make a deputation. After which, none of the deputies take any part in the discussion. You've made your deputation, we have heard your deputation. That will be followed by members asking questions. And the deputies might like to suggest questions which would be sensible to ask. So questions from the members, followed by comments from the members, at which point we will then make a decision. And that is the running order. Deputies are reminded that they should speak to the microphone. This is operated by the button on the right-hand side of the little console. Switch on, switch off. Then everybody can hear you, and you can be recorded for posterity. You will also be filmed from a camera at the back of the room. This will film the back of your heads, though we make at the front of your heads as you move to and from the table. So if anybody does not wish to be filmed at all, they should let me know. The next thing is the fire marshal regulations. There is no fire drill expected for this afternoon, so if the fire alarm does go off, it'll be for real. Please leave by either staircase. Do not use the lifts, and we meet under Queen Victoria's statue, and that is where we would meet to make sure everybody's alive and well. I think the last thing as a preliminary is that I think that since there were so many members of the public here, we should go around the table and tell everybody who we are. I am Hugh Mason, Councillor for St Jude Ward, and I am the chairman of the committee.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services Officer.
I'm Gerald Vernon-Jackson. I'm one of the councillors from Milton Ward.
I'm Claire Udy and I'm a councillor in Charles Dickens.
Judith Smythe, councillor in St Jude Ward and vice chair of this committee.
Susie Horton, councillor in Central Southsea Ward.
Luke Stubbs, councillor in East Caryswater.
I'm Councillor Lee Hunt and I'm one of the three councillors in Nelson Ward.
Robert New, councillor for Cobner Ward.
Frank Jonas, councillor for Hillsey Ward.
Jane Thatcher, planning officer.
Simon Turner, planning officer.
Sim Manley, city development manager.
Kieran Laven, planning solicitor.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, there was one person who didn't introduce themselves, and they might be a fig tree of mine imagination, but I don't think they are.
Sorry about that, Matthew Goward, planning officer.
Thank you. And Councillor Donna Jones has just arrived. Welcome, Donna. Yes, we have a full complement of councillors this afternoon. First item on the agenda, do we have any apologies for absence?
There's Councillor Pitt.
Right, thank you.
And I'm substituting for Steve.
You're substituting for Councillor Spitt. Thank you, Councillor Bernard-Jackson.
Chairman, I'm deputising today for Councillor Matt Atkins, and also just to inform you that Councillor Scott Pater Harris is on his way here, and he's deputising for Councillor Terry Norton today.
Right. Okay. This is interesting. Declarations of members' interests. Are there any interest? Councillor New.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to note that I am representing Copner Ward, but it doesn't preclude me from being able to vote on the applications before us here today in the ward unless I give a deputation.
That is perfectly correct. Councillor Horton.
Given my role as Cabinet Member for Education and having been vocal in the press around the Mayfield School application in support of it, I've taken legal advice and I will be stepping out for the discussion on predetermination issues. However, I've also sought advice and I can speak on that issue before I then leave the room. Is that correct?
We will take that as and after the other deputations.
Yes, that's fine.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not so much an interest, but just to let, I've already spoken to you that I need to leave just about 3 o'clock.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. I hope we'll get through quite a lot of business by then. Councillor Donna Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, apologies for being a few minutes late. I've just rushed from another meeting. And secondly, I have a personal but non-pecuniary interest in item 6, which is Councillor Terry Norton works at Mayfield School, albeit through an agency, but he is employed by that school. And there is obviously a planning application here for them today.
That would not constitute a pecuniary interest, and so you're certainly or predetermination. Right. I would like to take the minutes of the previous meeting, which was a very short one held on the 14th of August. I'll take them for accuracy. Page 1, page 2. Thank you. I'll therefore sign these as a correct record of the meeting. Thank you. Update on previous planning applications. Mr. Manley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've got a number of appeals just to bring to your attention. There's a couple of household extensions that were dismissed, one for a box dormer which was deemed to be visually intrusive and out of character. Another one was dismissed on the impact upon the neighbours. We do have a change of use from a C3 to a C4, which was refused on the basis of substandard sizes, particularly a bathroom. That was allowed at appeal on the basis that the inspector considered the bathroom size was sufficient, even though it was 0.4 of a square metre below the space size, and they considered that to be acceptable. We've also got another one which is a change of use for a house in multiple occupation. It was a variation of condition 8 to allow for, a variation of condition to allow for occupation of 8 from 7. The condition was to limit to 7. It was refused on the poor quality of the alternative provision for the living space within that, and that was upheld by the inspector, who considered that the basement area didn't offer an adequate provision for amenity for the future occupiers, and there was also a case of cost put in against us for that, and that was also dismissed.
Sim, could I ask what address was that at?
That was 19 Powers Court Road for the one that was dismissed at appeal. Okay. Do you want me to donate that nitrates?
Yes, item 5, an update on the situation on nitrates.
As you're currently aware, this item went before Cabinet and was moved to approve, subject to obviously us working up the calculations on that. That's presently being undertaken, and we are moving forward to it, and we should have something hopefully being brought forward in a completed form, a workable form, in October of this year.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Tim. That's very helpful. Obviously, you and I have had a number of conversations about this particular issue. Has it still got to be ratified by Push, or have Push agreed the approach now and you're just working up the wording and etc.?
This is the council's approach, not the Push approach. The Push approach is different. This is the one that we've got as a short and medium-term interim measure until the Push come forward with a much more strategic approach. So this is something that we're working up in terms of allowing developments to come forward.
But when we last spoke about this, the delay for the council implementing the short-term mitigation strategy straight away was the fact that you had to take it back through Push. So are Push not involved then in our own short-term mitigation? Are they only having to sign off the long-term mitigation, or because the point with the short-term is that they're going to need to do some nitrate trading with us as well, aren't they? Because they don't have the council housing stock that we do.
We are talking to them. The main delay in terms of moving ours forward, which is actually because we're still working on the metrics in terms of calculations and figures in relation to that. That's the delay. We are obviously in continual discussions with Push moving forward about looking at what we can do to support other authorities, and if there's any capacity within other authorities to bring forward and help us with the nitrates. So we are working together with Push, but this is the short-term measure which is being worked up, and it's that which will be brought forward in October, with hopefully in a position where we can start issuing decisions.
Councillor Stubbs, then Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
So just to clarify on that, I can see how we're going to be bringing forward minor applications, fairly small developments. Are you also looking at tabling larger scale developments out the committee, or do you somehow have to save up enough credits to be able to do that?
We've looked at it. We think that there should be up to 3 years as we move forward, and it's to do with the difference between granting permission and the implementation of the occupation, because it's at the point of occupation where you have the generation of the nitrates. So yeah, we are looking at bringing forward large schemes as well, and obviously what we will do is we will always try to ensure that we've got enough nitrates. If we hit a point where we get a surge of big applications coming in and there's not sufficient nitrates, then we may have to check back until we've generated enough through the mitigation measures to actually allow us to grant permission. But at this moment in time, we have sufficient to move forward.
Vernon-Jackson.
So is there any sign of common sense breaking out in ministries in London to try to get this sorted out? Because on the one hand we've got ministries demanding that we build things, and then other bits of other ministries demanding that we don't build anything, which is clearly nuts. Is there any sign of common sense happening in Westminster? I suppose I shouldn't have asked a stupid question, but...
They have been speaking to us, and they've been asking to get data about the number of applications that have been held up, so they are starting to look at it. So hopefully a solution along with Push and our mitigation will move forward.
Councillor Donna-Jones.
Thank you. Sim is aware of this, and Gerald, I thought I had spoken to you about this, maybe I hadn't, but anyway, Penny Mordaunt and I met with the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government on Monday 2 weeks ago, and you know, he was already very well briefed to this. I mean, I told Sim that the Simon Gallagher, who is the head of planning policy for the government, was also there, and you know, Penny and I were just trying to really emphasise the very unique situation we have in our harbour here, and the fact that we are surrounded by so much farmland, which is obviously where the issue comes from, particularly pig farming. And for those people in the audience probably think I'm mad talking about pig farming in Portsmouth. It's because of the Meon Valley and the nitrates drop down through the water table through through the chalk mines of Portsdown Hill and end up in Langton Harbour. And they were going off to speak to DEFRA about that, as I fed back to you, because I think the point Gerald's just made is a very good one, that actually one department is saying you have to build X number of houses, and another department through DEFRA have not actually created the problem. It's coming from a piece of EU legislation, but nonetheless, I don't think DEFRA are prepared to amend that legislation if and when we ever leave the European Union. So I think that the problem is there for the long term, and therefore the working with the water boards, as we've spoken about, is certainly Portsmouth and Southern Water is going to be a key feature, I think, which we will need DEFRA's help with, and the MHCLG are very, very aware of the impact it's having on our local house building industry here in the South Hampshire area, particularly here in Portsmouth, and Penny and I really push that point. I think they're on board, and I think you guys have switched into all the right people, and I was informed by the Secretary of State that the next day there was a push meeting at which people, senior civil servants and the DCOG were coming down to meet with officers from across the push councils. Is that correct? Did that happen?
Yeah, as far as I understand it. So there is the thing about the nitrates issue is not just one simple issue. There's lots of different things playing into it. Discharge rates through the water companies, nitrate levels coming from farming. So they are recognising it, they are moving forward it, and people are starting to look at this as an issue, and it's not just being down to us to try and resolve it. So I think I don't think there's necessarily some easy solutions, but they are looking at moving forward to try and come up with a broader strategy to assist us moving forward to start issuing residential permissions.
Thanks, Donna. That's very helpful. Useful update.
Right, 2 comments from the Chair before we move on. The first is that this is Sim Manley's last meeting. He is leaving our employ to go and take a position in Newcastle-under-Lyme. And I would like it to be minuted that the committee has benefited greatly over the last 18 months from his sound advice, and we wish him well in his future employment. That, I think, is unanimous. The second one is that you have in front of you supplementary planning matters with special reference to item 1 on the agenda, Mayfield School. This has come late, and but it is pertinent to the decision which you have to make this afternoon. I therefore propose a 5-minute adjournment of this meeting so that you may have time to read that supplementary information. We will stand adjourned for 5 minutes. Please read. Members, I shall resist the temptation to ask your views at this point about the remediation methods for tree replacement and also on the fractionated hydrocarbons, which you have obviously read about on the third or fourth page. I am well aware of your interest in bats, Councillor. Right. Okay, we now come to the first item on the... Yes, Councillor, it's all right. Councillor Horton, I'm reminded that you are legally making a deputation on this, so at this point I think it is wise that you leave the table, and then after you've made your deputation, that since you are a member of this committee, you should leave the room for the consideration of this item. Right, when that has occurred, I would like to ask the officer to give a report on this application.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Firstly, just to go over that, members' attention has been drawn to a SMAT list. Just to clarify for everyone in the room, it noted 2 late received objections. In addition, members' attention was drawn to further consultee comments which came in following publication of the committee report relating to highways, bats and Sport England. Lastly, and more importantly, several of the conditions have been edited. The full list of revised conditions are outlined in the SMAT list, and my colleague Simon will just provide further elaboration on that point.
Thank you. Just for the record and for everyone's benefit, the site's slightly unusual in having important phasing through the development, if approved, and it's important for the scheme to run smoothly and on time and to cost, to make sure the conditions are worded adequately to fit in with the proposed phasing. So the apologies for the long list of conditions there. They're not substantially different at all to what is in the published report previously. They simply draw attention to differentiate between the phases across the development. Otherwise, they are unsubstantially changed. Thank you.
Thank you. So on to the application at hand. The application relates to Mayfield School, which is bounded by Mayfield Road, Hewitt Road, Kensington Road and Randolph Road. The existing site is approximately 3.79 hectares and benefits from a form of access from all the surrounding roads. The main entrance is currently from Mayfield Road. The school buildings form a rectangular footprint with 2 internal courtyard areas. The school sits within a large residential area in North Portsmouth of attractive housing, typically good-sized terrace properties with 2-storey front bays. The site comprises the main school building, which is positioned centrally and extends the depth of the site, and 2 large open grassed playing fields to the east and west. To the north of the site are small areas of hard standing, used for recreational activities. The site is currently owned by the Department for Education and has been in operation as a school since 1932. The school's impressive long institutional character facade onto Mayfield Road, which is set back by a landscape lawned area, makes a very significant contribution to the character of the street scene. Other elevations are less impressive and views of them are partially restricted by the existing boundary treatments. While the existing school building is not a statutory listed building or a locally listed building, it is considered that the existing school should be viewed as a non-designated heritage asset. The only car parking on site is in the form of 2 accessible spaces located off Mayfield Road. The current cycle provision comprises 92 covered spaces and 6 uncovered cycle stands. Onto the proposal. The application comprises the development of the existing Mayfield School site to replace the existing school building with a modern, purpose-built, all-through school building. The new school would provide a total of 1,480 places for primary and secondary aged children. Pupil and staff numbers would remain the same as existing. The new school would cater for existing and future pupils aged between 4 and 16 years old. The entrance on Mayfield Road would be retained to ensure the continuity of the development in line with the existing building. The nursery building will be increased in size, but its capacity will not increase. The new school building would be constructed on the school site to the east of the existing school. While the existing buildings are retained, during construction to enable continued curriculum delivery. Upon completion of the new school building, the pupils and staff will decant into a new facility, enabling the existing school to be demolished and the replacement playing fields and sports pitches to be provided. The playing fields and sports pitches would occupy a majority of the western part of the site. The proposal would not result in any long-term reduction in the playing field provision on the site, but would in fact result in a net gain of green space. Mayfield School would be funded and delivered by the Department for Education as part of a Priority Schools Building Programme, which addresses the requirements of schools most in need of urgent repair. This slide shows the proposed phasing of the development. So just to summarise, the scheme includes the following elements: the proposed new school building, the proposed refurbishment and extension of an existing building to be used as the nursery, the demolition of the existing school building, the remediation of contaminated land on site, and landscaping associated with the proposal. So on to matters relating to design. The new school building would be mostly 3-storey in an upside-down U shape in plan form. The eastern arm would have a 2-storey element closer to Kensington Road and the sports hall to the north of the building, facing Hewitt Road, would be 2-storey equivalent. The building would be flat roofed to 12.5 maximum height. The proposed location of the new school would be 18.2 metres from the southern boundary relative to properties on Mayfield Road, 6.3 metres at its closest point to 14.5 to the eastern boundary relative to properties on Kensington Road, and 9.4 metres to the northern boundary relative to properties on Hewitt Road. The building would be split by floors, with primary on the ground floor, secondary on the second floor, and STEM, science, technology, engineering, arts and maths, on the third floor. The proposal would comprise a central courtyard concept, with the wings creating a south-facing courtyard concept. In addition to the teaching spaces, the school building will provide a performing arts and sports facility at ground floor to allow access for the community and for ease of access for parents. Whilst the footprint of a proposed school is smaller than that one of the existing, it is arranged in a more efficient way with accommodation set over 3 storeys. This allows for the creation of a substantially larger outdoor play and sports facility for the school, and also reduces the expanse of built form along the Mayfield Road. The project has been signed to ensure the existing school can continue to operate whilst the new school is constructed. As outlined in the committee report, the existing school buildings are no longer able to meet current education standards. The development of the new school will meet the educational vision of the City Council as education authority in line with national policy. It will afford significantly improved opportunities for community use of the facilities provided and meet requirements of the Disability and Discriminations Act. Demolition of an historic and prominent building is regrettable, but its significance and harm due to its loss is not deemed sufficient to outweigh the public benefits of a new school situated in a well-designed, modern, efficient building. The site's playing field provision will continue into the future for the physical and mental well-being of the pupils. Therefore, the proposal in principle is considered acceptable. The design of the new school would be contemporary in appearance and would be largely constructed from brick, metal cladding, curtain walling and glazed features. Final design can be secured by condition in relation to materials. The design would also seek to reuse several existing features as detailed in the committee report. The proposal will be built to BREEAM Very Good standards and will employ measures to reduce carbon emissions. The site would be extensively landscaped with appropriate facilities for the school, including social spaces, play areas and maintenance access.
The proposal retains the existing tree line along Mayfield Road and introduces additional trees around the site to provide further screening for a proposed development. The proposed sports, dining, kitchen and main hall facilities will become available for community use outside of core school hours. The nursery building on the northern side of the site would be extended on its western side. Canopies would be constructed on the north and south sides of the building, provide covered entrances and walkways. The above 3D images help to illustrate how the school would appear in the context of the street scene. The proposed landscaping scheme would help to soften the urban edge of the development, particularly on the Kensington Road frontage. The use of brick would help to create visual interest and break up the massing of elevations while announcing the location of the school in the local community. The limited size of the site, proximity of surrounding residential development and the need to maintain the existing educational facilities whilst building works proceed dictate the proposed location of the new school building. The scale and form of building produced in response to the site constraints is appropriate in its context. The proposal will introduce a range of sustainability features and rationalise outdoor sport and learning spaces. The proposal is therefore considered acceptable in design terms. The predominantly three-storey structure is suitably located on the site in a way which minimises the impact of residential amenity. Houses on Hewitt Road, Kensington Road and Mayfield Road would typically be some 22 metres to 33 metres from the new school building. Between the residential properties and the proposed building will be a mix of soft and hard landscaping features and the existing local roads. The main volume of the building is centred towards the middle of the new building, with the sections closest to neighbouring properties in the south-east corner dropping to 2 storeys, reducing the impact on the surrounding residential properties. By articulating the eastern wing as non-parallel to the boundary, it helps to reduce the impact of the flank elevation on the boundary and also assists in opening up the pupil entrance area. Furthermore, it's noted that the retention of the existing perimeter trees and their augmentation with new trees and shrubs would significantly help to soften and screen the new building to residents. Next up is some solar sun path diagrams to help show you the impact of the new building. The solar shadow diagrams submitted with the application indicate a minor degree of overshadowing from the proposed one on the residents to the east in the late afternoon and early evening for a majority of the year. The impacts from loss of sunlight are not considered to warrant refusal of the application. The proposal would introduce a large building in an otherwise open school playing field. The distances between the new building and surrounding residential properties reduce its impact to an acceptable level. The building is articulated in a way which avoids large facades overlooking and dominating the outlook from residential properties. The proposal is modern in its design and located such that it will sit comfortably in the wider residential context. Some disturbance from the demolition and construction is inevitable with any development. The Environmental Health Team therefore suggests that a condition is posed to minimise the impacts from disturbance during the demolition and construction phase. Subject to conditions, the Environmental Health Team raised no objection to the proposal. And there's the sun path diagram for September to December. So you can see really very little impact there to properties, especially on Kensington Road. The site is set in the context of a network of residential streets with the primary access Mayfield Road feeding off London Road and Copner Road. In common with most other school sites, the surrounding residential streets experience varying degrees of congestion during peak, pick-up and set-down times. The existing school operates with 46% of the 160 staff travelling to work by car. It is assumed that staff vehicles are parked in the surrounding residential streets. The application form explains that there will be no increase in pupil or staffing capacity. The local highways authority are satisfied that the school is likely to generate similar traffic movements to the existing facility and to that degree will not have a material impact on the operation of the local highway network. Pedestrian access into the site is located on Mayfield Road and Kensington Road. Access to the main reception and primary school will be from a new access gate installed within the existing brick wall on Mayfield Road. A new entrance for secondary school pupils has been created off Kensington Road. This entrance point utilises an existing field maintenance gate. The only car parking on site is in the form of 2 accessible spaces located off Mayfield Road. Access to these spaces will be provided via an existing vehicular gate. The on-site parking will remain the same, and there would be 30 covered cycle stands for a primary school, 60 covered scooter spaces for a primary school, and 100 cycle spaces for a secondary school, plus 24 covered cycle spaces for staff. The proposed vehicular access onto the site remains at the 4 entrance points that currently exist. There will be 1 separate vehicular access from Mayfield Road, allowing access into those accessible parking spaces. The Educational Skills Funding Agency operate to national standards and have clear rules on minimum space requirements for pupils, which means that there is not sufficient space for a car park on the new site. Whilst there is an existing area of Grasscrete, which could physically be used as a car park, it is not designated as one. Therefore, the school does not have an existing car park. Furthermore, the proposed school will be for the same number of pupils, therefore there will be no change to a parking requirement. To conclude, the LHA, Local Highway Authority, has raised no objection in terms of highway capacity and safety. The proposal does not represent a change in people and staff numbers and is acceptable in terms of the degree of traffic the site will generate and the on-site cycle parking provision. Finally, on to matters relating to ecology and trees. The site would be extensively landscaped with appropriate facilities for the school, including social spaces, play areas and maintenance access. The proposal retains the existing tree line along Mayfield Road and introduces additional trees around the site to provide further screening for the proposed development. A method statement has been submitted as part of a BAT survey. Provided that the agreed mitigation proposals are implemented, the county ecologist and Natural England would have no concerns over the proposal. In addition, the submitted information makes reference to biodiversity enhancement. Details of ecological enhancement could be secured under planning condition. The submitted plans would see the retention of all the existing mature boundary trees, with only 6 trees which are of limited amenity value being removed due to their location within the site. The application is supported by an arboricultural report and method statement which has been accepted and agreed. A condition would be applied to ensure the works would be carried out in accordance with that report. In addition, it is noted that the planting of new trees on site will see the tree cover almost doubled. Therefore, it is considered that the proposed amendment would not have an impact on ecology and trees. To conclude, the proposed amendment relates to an existing educational site within the built-up area. The development proposed is in accordance with the relevant development plan policies. It will provide Mayfield School and the local area with a needed modern education and community facility to facilitate the delivery of the national curriculum and support community development. It is of an appropriate design within the local context, acceptable with regard to highway capacity and safety, and would have no significant effect on local amenity. It is recommended, therefore, that planning permission be granted subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could Caroline Corcoran, Ryan Taylor, Daniel Wiseman and Councillor Susie Horton please come to the table? The deputies have 6 minutes each to present their case to the committee. Who's going to start?
Hello, I'm Caroline Corcoran. I'm Head of Sufficiency, Participation and Resources in the Education Service at the City Council, and I'd just like to read a statement in support of this scheme. This scheme for a new school is managed and funded by the Department for Education. The City Council's Education Service believes that the design of the new Mayfield School will provide first-class educational provision for both pupils and staff. The design offers modern, efficient, purpose-built facilities, both of the new building and the external facilities, with high-quality teaching and learning spaces. It is bespoke to Mayfield and meets the requirements of this all-through school. For example, a new STEAM centre, science, technology, engineering, arts and maths, with a focus on product design and innovation, STEAM investigates these concepts, but does this through inquiry and problem-based learning methods used in the creative process. Mayfield will be one of the first schools in the country with dedicated innovation laboratories in which pupils will problem solve and create products of the future. This will prepare pupils for high-end careers in engineering and design. The new building will be fully inclusive, including the latest equipment and spaces for full Disability Discrimination Act compliance, which is important as the number of pupils with special educational needs and disabilities is growing nationally, and the new build provides the opportunity for local pupils with these needs to attend this good school. Therefore, on behalf of the Education Service, the planning application is supported, and we hope that current and future pupils can enjoy the superb facilities that this design offers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Daniel Wiseman. I'm agent for the planning application. I'm very pleased to be here today and very pleased to help present this important project. As you have read, this proposal is 5 years in the making, and this planning application is 1 year in the making. And I want to thank your officers for their time and efforts in shaping this proposal. Your officers have influenced the layout, the design, the appearance at all stages, including 2 pre-application meetings and a great deal of correspondence and discussion in between. Your officers have also been informed and involved with the planned remediation of the site, and again, we thank you for your time. I'm sure you'll be discussing car parking later. So with regards to car parking, it is worth noting that this is a government priority schools building programme project designed to replace the worst conditioned schools across the country. And it is done so effectively on a like-for-like basis. There is no increase in pupils or staff numbers, and therefore there is no increase in parking provision. We are, however, delivering 2 accessible spaces to meet modern standards, which do not exist at present. It is also worth noting that any increase in car parking will need to be funded separately, and unfortunately no funds exist to do so. But more importantly, and this is the nub of it, any increase in parking will be at the expense of space for sports and play. I'm sure you'll hear the words costs later, and with regards to cost, it is worth noting that we are still in times of austerity, and every public pound is scrutinised in great detail. The government has determined that the cost of refurbishment and the ongoing maintenance, combined with the fact that the building does not suit modern methods of teaching, means that it is not economically viable to refurbish the existing building. This decision has the full support of the school's governors and senior management team, and indeed your own education officers. I'm sure you'll also hear the words contamination later, and with regards to contamination, I confirm that the best practice and legally compliant remediation scheme has been fully prepared, which included a full suite of testing and analysis. All risks to public health have been designed out. Alongside a full suite of technical reports and building condition studies, we have listened to and read the feedback from the teaching staff, the governors, the pupils and their parents, and we fully understand the significant shortcomings of the existing school building. And whilst, of course, it is regrettable that the existing school building is to be demolished, it is important to recognise that what we have here is a genuine opportunity to provide a new school building that will improve the educational opportunities of the thousands of pupils that will benefit from it through its lifetime. Pupils will have lessons in classrooms with roofs that don't leak. Pupils can enjoy lessons in classrooms that do not get too hot in the summer or too cold in the winter. It will be a modern, purpose-built school building where the noise from a music lesson won't permeate through and disturb others. Classrooms will have good acoustics where a language lesson that involves audio feedback will be heard clearly. The school will have a substantially lower water and energy consumption and a much lower carbon footprint as a result. This reduced energy bill, as one example, will allow more resources to be directed to education rather than the day-to-day running of an old building. The new 3-storey building will free up land, providing more space for sports and play at a time when it is needed now more than ever. The school will amend its travel plan, and by doing so it will encourage all of its staff to walk or cycle to work, to use public transport or to car share where possible to reduce its need for car parking on surrounding streets. This new school building would be designed and is designed to suit the differing needs of pupils from Key Stage 1 right through to Key Stage 4. As you've heard, it's a fully accessible building, whereas the existing building was not designed with accessibility in mind. The new school building would be a modern, exciting and welcoming building, and in particular, the landscape entrance is specifically designed to welcome and invite the local community to share these new facilities. It will be a wonderful new school with the most attractive features of the existing building retained. But please be assured that the design team has explored all options to retain the building and also sought to retain the facade, but it is not practical and it is not financially viable. Please also be assured, as you've heard, that this building is not a listed building, it is not locally listed, it is not within a conservation area, and ultimately, I feel there are much better examples of school buildings in Portsmouth. In my opinion, local and national planning policy confirms that it is far better to educate children in a new school building rather than bow down to nostalgia and seek to retain an old building that is not fit for purpose and cannot be brought up to modern standards. So whilst it is regrettable that the old school building needs to be demolished, I commend this planning application to you and I hope you can support this important proposal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Taylor.
Good afternoon. I'm here today to make two broad points. Firstly, that the current building is both of historical and architectural value, and it's certainly more than I think the committee report is giving it credit for. Secondly, that the proposed new building, although providing a good learning environment of which we can all appreciate, it is architecturally meritless and is not appropriate for the area in which it would sit. Indeed, it conflicts with the Portsmouth Local Plan 2012, where policy PC 523, Design and Conservation, states, and I quote, "All new developments must be of excellent architectural quality in new buildings," which I believe this is not. The current building was completed in 1932 to the designs of the then city architect Adrian Sharp. It is in the neoclassical style, and although additions and extensions have been made to it, these extensions are potentially reversible and the overall look, charm and character of the building is undiminished. Current proposals seek to maintain a very small amount of the individual features as token gestures. No mention, for example, is made of preserving the carved frieze above the front door in the current plans, which is worthy of particular note. There would also be the loss of all internal original features. These include parquet flooring throughout, original wall tiling in every room, coving, plasterwork, stair balustrades, the list goes on. And with regards to the exterior, the original granite porch hoods above the door, the bar stone quoinstones, banding and cornicing, all of value. Particular attention should be made to the pediments which top many windows on the front facade, all of which are examples of exceptional craftsmanship. The current proposals propose to keep a few pieces of bath stone for plinths, and this certainly isn't enough. Once the new building is constructed, the entirety of the old school building will be wastefully demolished. However, a reasonable compromise would be to look at keeping the front facade and up to the walls facing the quadrangle. The recent £4 million spent on the current infant and junior sections of the building are already suitable for use as the nursery and should require no further refurbishment. This would mean only the upstairs and roof areas would have to be looked into. I would also like to draw your attention to a particular example of this. In the initial scoping studies, which stated, and I quote again, "Water downpipes and gutters are corroded beyond repair." This was one of the points used to justify whole-scale demolition. However, the guttering has already been replaced at the front of school during the 2014 renovation works, providing further justification for the preservation of this part of the building. The proposed new building would be built from metal cladding, large amounts of glass, and bricks which are a different colour to any of the surrounding housing. These materials, combined with the 3 stories of the building, would mean that it would be out of character and it would be overwhelming in its size. Its materials do not mirror any in the old building, nor in the surroundings it is near. The current plans also would see the new school built with flat roof, which is far less sustainable and has a much shorter lifespan. The generic design, the design itself is generic in the extreme, and if a private citizen tried to make this sort of application to put a completely out of context modern building in the centre of a 1930s housing development, I'm sure it would not be approved. The 1932 building is the only structure of any architectural merit in the area, and its destruction and its modern generic replacement would cause huge damage to the streetscape and character of the local area. This is proved by its identification as a non-designated heritage asset. To conclude, This committee should think about suggesting at least the preservation of the front facade in some form, along with having the architects re-evaluate their choice of materials, their massing and the height of the new building in order to make it more attractive and especially more sympathetic. For the above reasons, this proposal should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. Much of what I was going to say has been covered, so I'll try and be brief. I just want to really highlight some points in the report. I think the need for high quality education provision is a given. We know that. And what this modern building offers is compliance with DDA, but also high quality teaching space. But I think two things are worthy of reinforcing. Is one, that it's an all-through school, and therefore it can be the design is actually purpose for that teaching and learning appropriate age groups. And the other has been detailed is the STEAM facilities. And I can't emphasise enough how much that would put us on the map in terms of on an educational front. The other thing I think is worth highlighting is the fact that when new schools are built, they're basically done through two ways at the moment. One is local authorities who haven't actually got very deep pockets, and the other is actually getting funding from the ESFA. So there's a whole process of bids that go through, and if you're lucky enough to have them, you need to treasure that kind of opportunity. What happens then is that there's extensive work, and the planning work for this goes way before my time. So this has been a 5-year project, I understand, and extensive discussions around delivering this scheme in partnership. Which probably, I'm going to just highlight probably the two big issues for me. One is I have a lot of sympathy with Mr. Taylor there. When you walk down that road and you see that building, there is a nostalgic feel about it. So the facade of the building, I don't think we should just completely throw that aside. It's a big thing. But there has been extensive dialogue with the ESFA, and the conclusions to that conversation is that their preferred choice is that a new build is the only option on the table. And I think that's a really important point, because in an ideal world, I think building a brilliant school behind the facade might be an attractive option, but it's not on the table. The other thing is, and I think we've seen it in previous planning applications, is that in a city like us, where we have very little spare space and flexibility in terms of pupil space, is that actually the model to build a new school is where the footprint allows you to actually build on the site, so that the phases that have been outlined can actually happen without children's education being overly disrupted. So in terms of the objections around the movement of that building to one end as opposed to where it is at the beginning, that's inevitability if you have that model of building on site. We saw it with Arundel Court. So it is a fact that some people are going to be nearer to a building than they were before, and other people are going to be further away from a building. But that is something that, that has come up before. And I think distances of 20 metres plus are acceptable when we look at other planning applications, and I think that goes for this as well. Parking, obviously, will come up in terms of objections, and when I was at the consultation event, that was by far the biggest issue. We know there's a problem with parking, so it's not that we're building a new school and the parking issue will go away, but I think all the comments that have been made around the fact that there's a parity in terms of what is the situation now and will be the situation moving forward is true. In actual fact, I've got every faith that actually things will be slightly better, because I absolutely know that the school's committed to looking at sustainable transport. So therefore, given what's on the table, in terms of an educational opportunity, I think it's a no-brainer, albeit with a little bit of nostalgic heavy heart in terms of the facade of the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. I'd be grateful if you could now leave the room for fairly obvious reasons. Members deputies may return to their seats, should they? Right. Members, questions?
Chair.
Councillor New.
Thank you. A question really for the officers, if they could expand a little bit on some of the concerns from residents that have been raised, specifically around the cladding being highly flammable. Would you be able to just tell us a little bit more in terms of information around this and what the basis is for this allegation?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure we have any high-level details of the specific nature of the cladding, the technical specifications and so on, but that would all be dealt with through building control, which of course is the proper forum for dealing with safety of a building with respect to fire in this instance.
Thank you, Chair. And just the final question, which may well fall into the same category, is just because residents have raised this, and I understand some of the local residents were very concerned about some of the notices that went up with regards to the asbestos removal and testing. Now, I know that we've known about that as a City Council for quite some time here, but people, when there was almost kind of an air of there was not enough information coming forward, when people were asking actually within quite a relatively recent period with regards to some signs went up which did alarm people. But could you just give us a bit of an overview or more detail with regards to that work that's going on, which I think is in the Eastfield?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I understand that there's good knowledge of various contamination issues at the site, in particular asbestos. I understand there's some records from the past, and naturally, as part of the application, the applicant has been required to look at it afresh. Hence the sampling over the summer, in particular on the Eastfield, I understand. That was done in order to inform the submissions as part of the application. So that's normal. Whatever precautions would have been taken by the surveyor at that point. So that's informed the application up to now in the report that they submitted to support the application. That's only the first stage, effectively. From the conditions you've seen, the very long conditions as we have for contaminated land, because it is complex, the next phase, in the event of a consent today, will be further testing, desk studies, investigative works on site, further as necessary, submission of reports to our colleagues in the contaminated land team to make sure that all known contaminants are properly examined and addressed with a clear remediation strategy. And that's how we have to fit it in with the different phasing of the site. First of all, the decontamination of the Eastfield, phase 1, to enable the school to be built. And then there'll be a second round of testing prior to demolition and the digging up of the land, or the resultant earth movements at phase 2, the current school building. So there are different phases of the normal range of investigation and remediation all have to be approved by the council. So up to now, a certain level has been done, sufficient to get the okay up to now from the contaminated land colleagues, and then the next phase will be further detailed studies moving on to the actual remediation scheme and the monitoring of the site thereafter.
Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. Simon, could I ask, we're told on the one hand that this is a very attractive building, and it absolutely is, and an important part of the local streetscape. And on the other hand, we're told that because this is a government-funded scheme, this is take it or leave it. Redoing the existing school using the frontage is just not on offer from government, and if we don't want a new school, then we say no to it, but if we do want a new school, this is the only offer. Is there any planning way that there is a route to be able to put pressure on government to get them to rethink those conditions, or do you think we're stuffed?
In terms of the questions you've asked, the application in front of us is the one that we have to determine today. In relation to the assessment that was carried out, the assessment, whilst there's a position about the funding of that, actually the assessment of the impact of the building was carried out through the planning process, which is independent of the financial side of it. What we basically do, we've looked at it from a planning perspective, and we've looked at the is a non-designated heritage asset, and as part of the process we've assessed the loss of that building from a planning perspective, and the way we do it is we look at the merits of the building and its retention and weigh that against wider public benefits, which is the test within the NPPF. And the conclusion that we've reached is that whilst it's regrettable, as the report says, for the loss of this building, the wider public benefits being brought forward by this redevelopment are considered to outweigh it. So it's not necessarily a financial. That's something that the school and the Department of Education get involved in. We've looked at it from a planning perspective and assessed it on its planning merits.
A question from the chair then. We find on page 12 references under BREEAM Very Good Standards to measures to reduce carbon emissions. Could you expand a little upon that?
Yes, as outlined in additional documents submitted with the application, it would see better installation, more energy efficient. There will be reuse of existing materials wherever possible, responsible construction methods, training for premises managers, an updated travel plan, the already mentioned landscape and ecology plan. The thermal ratings will be improved. The school uses a sort of passive design which makes use of natural daylight, avoiding the need for artificial lighting. Things like a pre-demolition audit, all these things, they've gone through the checklist to make sure, that it achieves its very good BREEAM rating.
Councillor Smythe.
Just to follow up on that and to ask a further question, please. I think it's very important that new buildings, particularly public new buildings, are put up to a high standard. Are we as an authority already in a position to measure the reduction in carbon and that sort of thing, and will that be part of this, your conditions and so forth as we go on? Since we all agreed the climate emergency motion, that's the sort of thing we're going to need to do in the future if we haven't done it now.
Unless the applicants shake their heads wildly at me, I suspect we don't know in detail the carbon efficiency of existing buildings. We may not have wanted to examine that. I don't know the details of what's required for BREEAM and so on. The main point is to meet the new standard, Councillor, the very good standard, and that will be secured as part of that is part of the application and will be secured as part of the City Council partnership development.
Thank you.
Members' comments. Councillor Hunt.
Well, thank everybody for their evidence today and so on. But honestly, I've been sat here looking at this and I'm thinking, I want to go back 57 years and I want to go to this school because it looks to me a really exciting place that young people are going to want to go. When I was at my school, people used to climb over the walls to get out, and I can imagine here they'll be climbing over the walls to get in, quite frankly. I mean, what a fantastic opportunity for our city, from all the young people that are going to go to this school. Absolutely wonderful. I'm really sorry that we will lose some of the city's history, and change is never easy. I know that. I've been a councillor long enough to know how difficult this can be, but I don't doubt for a single moment that this school will improve to an outstanding school in due course as a result of the facilities that are going to go in here and the learning that's going to come out of it. So that's that aspect of it. Clearly I like it. I am sorry to see the facade go. I'm grateful for the young chap who made the very eloquent deputation. But I'm also drawn to the roof and the sheer number of solar panels going to be on it, the wind catchers that will cool the school down, which we heard a little bit about earlier on. So there's clearly a lot of green innovation going into the school that will help the city reduce its carbon footprint, which is enormously important. So as you can tell, I'm going to vote in favour of it. There's a lot more I'd love to say about the sports. Maybe Councillor New will touch on the trouble we've had around College Park and other parks lately. This is going to provide a lot of community activities throughout the day and into the evenings for young people and give them more things to do. But if others want to talk about that, I'm very excited about that as well.
Are you therefore proposing the officer's recommendation?
I think I should let my colleagues in Cotton do that if they like to do that.
Okay.
But I'll second it very happily.
Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say really a few things just about the design, because that's one of the things which has come up. And here we have a 3-storey building designed through basically for a central government programme. And if you look around the country, there's quite a few secondary schools that have been replaced or maybe new ones built, and 3 stories now is very much the norm, and they actually all look not unlike this one. In fact, the new school we have up at King Richard's looks somewhat like this, and of course you would expect that, because the whole point is not to keep reinventing the wheel every single time, that you learn things about what's a good design and good layout and economical to build layout for a school. And off the back of that, this is actually quite good value for money. I mean, if you think back to the Building Schools for the Future programme, 2007, something like that, the proposal then, I can't remember specifically for this site, but for the 1,000-space secondary schools, they were about £25 million a piece. Well, we've got 1,400 spaces, I think it's 22 million, and it's 10 years later, or 12 years later, we've had all of that inflation in between. So by being a bit smarter about the design and sharing good practice really around the country, that you're ending up with a situation where we're looking at saving a good third, maybe more, off the cost of each building. And I think that's quite considerable. Of course, there is a flip side of that, which is that you do end up with buildings which do look a bit the same. The schools around the country, it's true enough. Of course, it doesn't necessarily, like in this case, reflect the local context around it, but I think that there's a compelling case for the approach which has been taken. So I'm very happy with this scheme. Conscious of Councillor Hunt's generosity, I won't propose it either. I should see if the Cotton members were going to do it. I was going to, but I'll hold back.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think that this has been a long time coming, as Councillor Horton said. We did put in the application, I think it was in late 2014, to the Department for Education for this funding. And one of the points Councillor Stubbs has just said, that actually the time that it has taken to get to the Planning Committee today has meant that this scheme has been significantly improved. I've had a good walk around the school a couple of months ago. I've spent time with the senior management team there, and I remember when the nursery opened, the preschool opened, the junior school opened, and actually it's remarkable. And when our education specialists at the council discussed with all of the councillors on the council what the proposals were for the redevelopment of that site, I thought, they're never going to get that amount of education provision to make it the first state-funded through school in the city. It's just not going to happen. And actually, they've done it, and they've done it really, really well. There is an outstanding head teacher there and senior management team who are doing a fantastic job. In terms of the concerns from people, parking is obviously an issue. I appreciate that this is not necessarily going to make the parking situation worse, but it doesn't mean that the existing situation is good either, because it's not. And I have had the benefit of having a one-to-one conversation with the headmaster about this, David Jeeps, who has said that obviously as the development goes forward, as the builders in train and as they're using the school, and if there are pockets of space that they can use in the future, there's no promise, but of course he will see if he can utilise that for more scooters, for more bikes, and potentially some parking if there was a disabled teacher that was at school or someone else that had a specific requirement. I do think that this is going to significantly enhance the learning experience for, a lot of children in the city. Over 1,000, nearly 1,500 pupils will be attending this site every single day. Some of them will start there at the age of, 2 or 3 months old in the nursery and go right the way up until they are 16, I'm sure. I think that the design, schools are often not beautiful buildings, and I take on board the point that one of the deputies made today, Mr. Taylor, Ryan Taylor, and actually, you know, I do appreciate that there is beauty in the existing building. I think the fact the archway is being retained is a nice touch. I understand there will also be potentially some other features from inside the existing building that will be retained, but under the policy that we need to take into consideration, I think it's PCS, is it PCS 23, the one about the, PCS 23. Yes. Actually, you know, enables us to put, I mean, Mr. Taylor talked about if any developer came along and tried to put a building that looked like this, a fairly monolithic building, into the middle of a residential housing estate, it would be unlikely to get planning permission. Well, you know, I take on board that point, but actually there is a huge community benefit here, and that policy is very much designed to accentuate the community benefit, and the educational offering is, I agree with Councillor Hunt's point, will be second to none, and on that basis I'll also be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor New.
Well, most people have covered all the points that I was going to talk on, but I'm in agreement with my colleagues here, and it's really nice. And I think one of the things that we're often at fault at and are accused of as councillors and the planning authority is that we don't build for the future and that we're not forward-thinking enough. And I think the application that's come through, certainly since I saw the first versions of the what could be and the consultation, etc., have been very good. And the school and all of the relevant associated bodies that have been involved in bringing this application here today, I think have been, they've listened to people's concerns, and they've been pragmatic where they can be, whether that's from the conservation where possible of the existing building and the small parts that are now going to become features, which will still be there hopefully in 100 years' time. But I've been around this school many times as well, and I know that the current teaching environment isn't fit for purpose, and it has come to its end of life. And I think this is a really sensible, exciting application to come forward. I mean, I'm hugely excited to have this in my own backyard as well, you know, as I'm sure any member here would be if they had a similar development going forward in their ward. And I think I would just like to place on record as well my thanks to the team at the school under Mr. Jeeps, who are doing such a good job in creating not only a focal point in the community through the extracurricular activity that they're offering, but I think that this will be really enhanced, as Councillor Hunt said, some of the problems that we face locally around antisocial behaviour. I think that this new development will really give the local community a focus and hopefully additional, well, certainly somewhere to go in the evening to focus on things. And do you know what? I always think things like that can open up so many different career pathways as well, whether it's in sports, performing arts. Some of these outside performing arts spaces in the summer are going to be incredible. I can't wait to be invited or to see some advertised outside plays. And so I think there's a heritage and a cultural offering as well that's coming that doesn't currently exist there. And I would just like to say thank you to everyone involved as well for listening not only to local people but also to do the best that they can within the circumstances that they were working within. And on that basis I'd be happy to propose the officer's recommendations.
I assume, Councillor Hunt, that you're happy to second that.
Indeed. Thank
you. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be discordant. I have to say, educational attainment in the city is not as good as it could be, and we have to do everything we can to try to make sure that we give schools the facilities to be able to make sure that we drive up educational attainment for the benefit of pupils in the city and through their whole lives. And I absolutely accept that a more modern school will be able to do that. I'm deeply disappointed that it looks as if we've got there seems to be a real lack of imagination about being able to reuse things. This building is a much valued part of the local landscape. And one of our responsibilities is about creating a sense of place, of people understanding and knowing where they live and having a value to it. And I am sorry, it might be a slightly nostalgic thing, but with that facade and Mr. Jeep standing outside the front door in his academic gown, probably no longer holding his cane, but that has been a part of that community for 80 plus years. I know David hasn't been there all of that time, and I think this will get passed, but I think it's a real disappointment that we could have it isn't. This is a government scheme, and you're following their rules. But I think it's a real lack of imagination to have not reused that frontage and some of the buildings. We all know, whatever the carbon contributions of running a building, actually the carbon contribution of building it is the big bit. And actually reusing a building and bringing it up to date is significantly better in terms of carbon being released into the atmosphere than building anything new. So I think we have a fait accompli. I'm really disappointed what I would see as a lack of imagination from government. Personally, I want this to look like Portsmouth. I want this to look like Cotton. I don't want it to look like Bracknell. And if we have the same school here as in Bracknell, I think we are diminished. But I have to balance that against the advice that we have, which is that educational attainment will be supported and increased to be able for the next generation of pupils to be able to achieve even better results, and that has to weigh very heavily. I wish we had been presented with a different scheme that reused the existing structure, and I fear that if this is the way in which government are going to go, that any new school in the city is going to demand the demolition of the old one, and we will lose all those historic schools that have been such an important part of the people's lives and history in this city.
Councillor Oudey?
This one's been quite a tough decision for me to make, and I'm probably going to abstain on my vote, if not vote for it. My first concern is because I read in the news a few months ago over the design aspect. Obviously, I feel like because the government's paying for it and they're crying austerity, the only reason why they can't do up the main school is because there will be a lot of asbestos in the building, and you can't siphon out 1,500 children to another building. We don't have provision for that in the city. Unions have been doing campaigns about asbestos in school buildings. Teachers are becoming ill, and it's very much the case that could be in Mayfield if they try to build the new school in the middle. This is why it's going to cost so much money, obviously. I feel like it's a cut and paste school design. I was the first year at Milton Cross, so I spent a year in an annex, and then I went over to Milton Cross. The external face of the building pretty much looks the same, and I feel like even though there is definitely a lot more room in the halls of Milton Cross, which is another point, because like you're in between all the classrooms, it looks like it's 2 door whips, which I just don't even think is disabled friendly, really, because when classes are kicking out at different times, everyone's going to cram into the small hallways, and it's going to be very hard for people with limited mobility to get through in the first instance. I just don't feel like there's enough free space in the school, and the library to me looks tiny as well. I just feel like, as people have mentioned, people will be coming here from when they're babies or toddlers and staying here until they're 16 years old, and I feel like an all-through school kind of like institutionalises people in that way, and it's such a small space of going back and forwards into the same place. It just makes me feel uneasy in a way. I totally get that we need new school provision, and I'm happy to keep up with latest technology. I was, as someone with an arts degree, I was quite shocked to hear that STEM's got an A being siphoned into it now, so it looks like we're trying to keep up with the arts, but I feel like they're going to be destroyed in about a year. I just want to bring up your design pictures, because no one's wearing a school uniform in the design pictures. And there's no cars parked outside the school, and we'll all know that all the parking spaces will be taken up outside the school. I feel like it could have been a better design. I feel like if maybe there was more money and more provision to send the children to different schools whilst it was being built, we could have retained the nature of the building of the 1930s. I feel like architecturally, we're just looking at the same things again and again. Like I said, Milton Cross was built 20 years ago, and we've not moved any further forward. Everything looks the same. I'm just a bit disappointed, but well done for getting a new school, so I'm probably going to abstain on this one.
I suppose the comment from the chair is, as someone who in his first year of secondary school was COLA monitor. I'm all in favour of newborn schools. Are there any other comments from members? Now, in which case we have the officer's recommendation proposed and seconded. Will all those in favour please show? Will any against please show? Will abstentions please show? Thank you. That therefore is carried, and thank you very much for all of the deputies, and thank you for your contribution, members. I would now briefly like to take item 4, very briefly, which is the land to the suburb of 76 Vernon Road. Is Mr. Cox here?
I'll just get Councillor Horton back.
Is Mr. Cox here? No.
Chair, sorry, if I could just help on that. He's not here. We received an email this morning saying the item's been deferred.
Yeah. Okay, well, I was going to apologise to him were he here. I'm advised that for technical reasons, this item has to be deferred until our next meeting. And I trust members will accept that. Great. I've only been going an hour and a half. Sorry? Do this one and then a break. Okay. Sorry? Oh, we'll do this one. Okay. May I have... I don't think there's enough room at the table, so can I have the objectors, Mr. Clapham, Mr. Swinburne, Mr. Bray, Mr. Henderson, and Mr. Blair to the table, please. If Mr. Knight could come and take the chair next door to Councillor Vernon Jackson, we will move. It's all right. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much. I've just looked at Mr. Bray's face and realised that I know Mr. Bray from many years ago, but it's personal and non-pecuniary. You know my father. You ended up turning our house into a nursing home. Anyway, he didn't even realise, so therefore you can see how non-pecuniary it is.
I think that is a non-pecuniary interest, and so you may stay. Thank you very much for pointing it out that way.
I'm quite happy that that's sufficiently remote to not incur any kind of further action.
Can I have the officer's report, please, on Fontenoy House Grand Parade?
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for a new dwelling to be formed by the addition of 2 stories to the roof of Fontenoy House, with some external alterations as well. I shall go back to those in more detail in a moment. The site location is in Old Portsmouth. Most people will be familiar with the area, but I can briefly describe it to you. On the south side, at the bottom of the picture, we have the seafront and the King's Bastion and the old Garrison Church to the east there. This is High Street, turning the corner into Broad Street, moving down further west into Spice Island. So this is in the heart of the old Portsmouth conservation area. This is Grand Parade, a cobbled square with a mixture of buildings, mostly historical, of 3 to 4 stories typically. And there is the cathedral, of course. So the development is in this block here, which sits like an island in the middle there, and it forms the northern corner with a front both to Grand Parade and to High Street. In more detail, the most important heritage assets in the area, apart from being the conservation area in general, you have the scheduled ancient monument and Grade 1 listed buildings of the Square Tower and associated structures, the Long Curtain and King's Bastion. And here is the Royal Garrison Church. And then the most other proximate, perhaps, listed building is number 60 opposite on the corner here. The site itself is a unremarkable mid-20th century building, 3 stories, brick facade. This is Grand Parade in front of it, so that's the northeast elevation. There's a similar picture below. There's the Square Tower peeking out from behind. There's a slightly fuller view of the Square Tower with the sea beyond. More modern buildings on the opposite side, 3-story garages, houses and so on. This is from Battery Row. Here is the site from Broad Street looking east. So there's Square Tower. That's the southern facade of the island. I've described it up as the block. The Wellington Public House and Fontenoy House here. That is Grand Parade looking northwest. So there is Fontenoy House on the corner. There is number 60 opposite with its mansard roof. And just peeking up above that, a further addition, smaller addition on top of the mansard. We've got a plethora of plans for you. Not all of them I'll go into in great detail. The existing plans aren't particularly relevant, I don't think, to the proposal. Here are the proposed plans. I'm not sure how easily I can blow them up, but I think you have them in front of you, which show an addition at roof level, the first roof level, which is almost the entire footprint of the building, which provides a mixture of bedrooms and living spaces. And then above that, a slightly smaller footprint set back from the main elevations by 2.5 metres from the 2 front elevations here, and a bigger distance here, I'm sorry about the size, for a roof terrace. And that is the second story of the development itself. So 2 stories to form 1 house. So here's the elevation existing. So the Square Tower is there. This is the block with Fontenoy House here. It's flat roofed, so that roof behind must be at the rear of the block. Here's Grand Parade. And this is the 2-story proposed on top, fronted in zinc cladding and glazing predominantly, with a glazed balustrade at the higher level, obviously for safety. This is the view from the northeastern view from Grand Parade itself. So you might remember from previous picture the Square Tower will be set further behind there, down the street. Some more elevations from the south. And some sections and so on. And that's the section through the courtyard, as you can see here. These are more helpful perhaps to give you the overall picture in three dimensions. The existing 3-story building, utilitarian brick, modest if you like. There's the Square Tower. And so the proposed development is the 2-story, 1 and 2 above that, to provide the 1 new dwelling. I mentioned earlier on the external alterations that are part of the application. Treatment with ground floor render, painted a dark colour here. New windows, you can see some of the changes, for example here. New window openings, replacement windows, and brick slip applied to the exterior of the building. So a general freshening up, renovation of the existing building with the extensions above to provide a new dwelling. Here are some longer illustrations, again from the southeast, I think, from Royal Garrison Church, looking across Grand Parade. There's Spinnaker Tower There's the existing building, there is the building with the proposed rooftop extension. The view from the corner of Broad Street turning into High Street, so Square Tower is just out of picture on the right. There's Fontenay House. There is the proposed development. There is number 60 opposite, again I mentioned earlier, with the mansard roof and a slightly further element on top of that. Before I forget, members will have seen, and so for the record, members will have received, I understand, a submission from the applicants, directly from the applicants, a collection of plans and documents and text explaining their proposal and how it's evolved over the years, the last couple of years, I believe, in discussion with officers. Otherwise, taking you through the report briefly, there was an application in 2013 for one extra storey on the building, a flat-roofed extension to provide 2 dwellings. That was refused by the City Council, but won on appeal. And then members may have noticed a second submission effectively in 2017 carried on that consent with a second submission. We've consulted the various range of consultees that you would expect. Historic England in particular is important given the very important heritage matters locally. You would have seen Historic England have expressed some concerns about the proposals. In very simple summary, as the report says, they note there is a degree of harm to the setting of the Square Tower in particular in terms of views, and has left the council to weigh that harm against the public benefit, which refers back to the policy tests set out in the MPPF. Environmental Health have a concern about the adjoining pub, the Wellington. Its extraction flue for the food it provides exits, I think, at 2nd floor. So there's an issue in terms of putting a further accommodation next to it. That's something that could be hopefully technically resolved, but as it stands, there is that concern. So really, I've raced through the report there. There are, as members will see, a large number of both objections and representations in support of the application. And we've taken members through both the principle of the development, the heritage matters, residential amenity with respect to odour in particular, transportation matters and ecology. With respect to transportation, the inspector in 2014 with the 2 flats proposed didn't have a concern about parking and highway matters, and so with a proposed dwelling of 1 now instead of the 2, we've carried through that same lack of concern. So ultimately, taking you to the conclusion of the recommendation, we have 4 distinct reasons for refusal proposed. I'll take you through from back to front because they're of diminishing importance effectively. So the least important, if I can put it that way, number 4, is the recreational disturbance to the special protection areas. That's with respect to birds. Now that's a technical refusal, just to be clear for members. You may noticed on previous decisions this sort of a situation arising when officers are expecting to recommend for refusal on application. We tend not to ask for the money to be paid for the mitigation scheme and then have to return it again, likely, so we simply refuse it on those grounds, acknowledging, as set out in the report, that it's a technical matter and is easily resolvable in the event of a consent. Thirdly, the noise and odour impacts I've mentioned previously. There is that concern, but again, we would hope that could be looked at further. Really, we've concentrated over the years, I think it's fair to say, on the heritage matters, the design and scale, but that is a smaller area that we would hope could be addressed further. And then on to reasons 1 and 2, which are the substantive and heritage matters. Given the increase in scale of the proposal, which we do feel is quite significant in a very sensitive area, we didn't conclude in the end that it was acceptable with respect to the local character of the conservation area and the setting of those important heritage assets. So both with respect to the Square Tower and the King's Bastion, reason 1, and reason 2, the conservation area, officers were concerned, sufficiently concerned, to recommend refusal. We didn't feel, with respect to the policy tests, that the public benefit of the renovation in particular, but more importantly, the provision of 1 extra dwelling was sufficient to outweigh the harm that we believe exists from the proposal. So that is why, regrettably, we had to recommend refusal on heritage matters as well.
Thank you. We now come to the objectors. Since you have 12 minutes between you, it will be 2.5 minutes each. I'm prepared to be a little flexible, given that there are 5 of you, but not overly flexible. So, can you please give us your objections?
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Graham Swinburne. I'm representing the Friends of Old Portsmouth Association, who are the local residents association, who object to this application. FUPA committee have either been presented with or seen a couple of iterations of this project. I can make clear that FUPA committee have never endorsed or given any encouragement to the proposals we have seen. Well, one key theme is the point of conflict with the conservation area guidelines. The proposals conflict with the character of the conservation area and with many of the guidelines approved and encouraged by you in the Portsmouth Conservation Area Number 4 Guidelines for Conservation. I will not list all the areas this application conflicts with the guidelines, as they're too numerous to mention in the available time, and your officers in your report have adequately summarised all of the issues. The combination of elements, the 2-storey roof, the windows, the brickwork of the proposal will redevelop Fauntleroy House from an unobtrusive residential building into what we consider, and it's the view shared by your design review panel, that it was almost like a commercial office block. There are many issues this development will create, resulting in loss of light, noise from the outside space and visual intrusion and loss of privacy, which I know the thresholds for harm are in many cases subjective, but the effects of the development you are considering will adversely affect your local residents living nearby. The current proposal is much more comprehensive, larger, bulkier than the application which was subsequently granted appeal in 2014. The inspector, in granting the appeal in 2014, did not have to consider most of the elements proposed in this application. In granting the appeal, which was a very contentious and finely balanced decision, the inspector justified her approval as the modest single-storey roof extension would be lightweight in appearance. The application before you now would not receive the same comment to justify approval. My second point is the effect on the streetscape, which your officers have very eloquently put. The focus, as you move down the high street with the cathedral, a Grade 1 listed building on one side, you've got the pub, the Dolphin, the oldest pub in Portsmouth on the left, is the Square Tower as you look down the street, with the bust of Charles I. Currently, Fauntleroy House is there. It blends in. It's sort of the surroundings. Currently, the situation will dramatically change if this application is approved and implemented. Nothing should be allowed to distract the focus from the Square Tower. The proposal you are considering today will distract from the Square Tower, which is a Grade 1 listed historic structure. In conclusion, Fauntleroy House does require maintenance and has already got planning permission for further development. So, something could be done to improve the building, create a new property for the applicant and improve the rest of the building for the residents and still not become the most dominant building in Grand Parade and the High Street. It just isn't this proposal. I ask you to reject this application. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Councillors. My name is John Clapham and I live in Grand Parade. Living requirements are not a planning consideration, but conservation and design merits are. What is meant by conservation? Very subjective, I fear, but we do have the Council's own Old Portsmouth Conservation Guidelines to help us. Is it, is it compliant with these? The answer is emphatically no, which I am pleased to see that the Planning Department agrees with by recommending a refusal. Its height exceeds that of the guidelines. The materials and designs are not sympathetic with the building that it will sit on, nor to those adjacent to it. It is overbearing and dominating to Grand Parade and High Street. It is certainly not in keeping with a layman's concept for a redevelopment within a conservation area. Just look at the applicant's CGIs and ask yourselves, is this redevelopment right for this historic, well-visited part of the city? The answer, again, is emphatically no. It is architecturally bankrupt. If approved, it will lead to contempt of planning policies. Fauntleroy House stands at a prominent junction on a main route to the popular point, fully visible to all. As such, any alterations to its appearance must be of the highest calibre, which this is not. Please do not destroy our cherished locality with this carbuncle on the roofline. Because of the foregoing, I respectfully ask the committee to support its planning department by rejecting this application on the grounds that it is not compliant with the conservation guidelines. This proposal, if given the go-ahead, will result in a loss of town and skyscape which cannot be justified on the grounds that it is again to the conservation area. I thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. My name is Richard Bray and I live in 5 Battery Row. I've lived there since 2007, 12 years ago now. My property is directly in front of Fontenoy House. I do not support this application for the reasons outlined in my email objected dated 27th October last year. If I may politely highlight these reasons. The new 2 stories will reduce the light significantly at the rear of my property, along with offer the opportunity for people to look directly into my property. This an intrusion of my privacy. Further, this 2-storey build would have a similar effect to putting an 18 to 20 foot high fence up. This in turn being an overbearing nature, also very much out of character with other close by properties. I also feel the applicant is pushing the boundaries and with respect to his luck way too far. This after successfully having a 1-storey planning application granted just a few years back. In simple terms, it's as if these 2 stories have just been plonked onto the existing roof. As said, totally out of character with its surrounding properties and extremely awful on the eye. In summary of which is very much as concluded by the planning department in their report, which I'm now pleased to see they have recommended a refusal. Hopefully you, the committee, will be like-minded as the planning department and refuse this application. I am therefore here to support the planning department in their recommendation, at the same time personally objecting most strongly to this planning application. I thank you for your time and listening to my view. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Councillors. My name is Richard Blair. I've lived in Old Portsmouth on or off for 60 years or more, and I live at Keygate House, Grand Parade, directly opposite the level with this proposed development. I objected because of its height, its bulk and design, but mainly of the mass of glass along the north boundary. Looks like a goldfish bowl to me. I noticed that the article in last Saturday's edition of the News, an article clearly written by the applicant intended for a sympathy vote. There it is, Chairman. It was stated that there were 44 objections and 27 letters of support. But it's interesting to note that 20 of the latter of support were in the same format, suggesting possible absence of sincerity, while the majority of the remainder were from Fontenoy House, which is to be expected, and 3 from the applicant's house himself. This indicates that genuine support is thin on the ground. There are, however, many local residents who have genuine concerns and have objected in the past, and who would be here today but for the short notice that has been given to the committee meeting. Fortunately, their concerns have been brought together in the Planning Department's report. Please therefore support the Planning Department's recommendation by refusing planning permission. Thank you very much.
Mr. Henderson.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Terry Henderson, I live in the High Street now. I'm a former member of the City Council and, of course, a former member of the Planning Committee. I've come here this afternoon, first of all, to thank the officer who wrote this. I think it's an excellent report, professional from beginning to end. And I've also come along to support his report, of course. It's a #1 conservation area down there. A very important area indeed. And if you look at paragraph 2, I mean, that really says it all. It jumps out, doesn't it, to you? It says here, incongruous design, excessive height and bulk and massing would be an over-dominant feature with an unsympathetic relationship to adjacent and nearby properties and would fail to complement the street scene and therefore neither preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the old Portsmouth conservation area. That's it, Chairman, in a nutshell, and I do support the officer, and I do hope that the members will vote against this proposal this afternoon. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you very much. If the 5 objectors could return to the public gallery, I can bring up Jason and Kate Phillips and Councillor Tom Wood.
Thanks very much.
May hand anything you like out to the councillors, but they become the property of the council.
That's okay, you can keep it.
We have to. Right, thank you. Right. Members, first of all, Mr. Knight. You have 6 minutes to address the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and councillors. I've summarised what I'm going to say in just a one-page summary of the reason why Fontenoy House leaseholders are in support of this application. My name is Anthony Knight, and I am the chair of the Fontenoy House Leaseholders Group, which we've been established for over 12 years, and I represent the views of 8 leaseholders. All leaseholders support the planning application. There are 3 key points that leaseholders considered in making a decision to support this planning application, which I'd like to bring to the notice of the councillors, and they were that the applicant will be an owner-occupier. The application addresses the whole building, and the new building significantly improves Fontenoy House and enhances Grand Parade. To be more specific, I'd like to take each of those 3 points. Firstly, the owner-occupier. I have owned my flat in Fontenoy House for 10 years, and I've tracked the previous leaseholders who voted against the previous planning application, and I've also followed the developments over the last 6 years. The previous building landlords, Shipland Estates and also Longbow Limited, were only interested in taking money out of the property by selling the freehold and the planning application that went with it, without any additional improvements to the building. Both previous landowners only had 1 meeting with leaseholders before imposing their planning application design without considering any of the inputs from leaseholders' comments. Lots of cooperation was promised, but nothing was heard after the first meeting, and despite requests for information, leaseholders' views were ignored, and the meetings were just a tick-box exercise before the current planning application went through on appeal. This is not the case with the current planning applicant and landowner. Leaseholders have had 5 formal meetings with the applicant. We have been kept fully informed of the planning process. Our views have been appreciated and incorporated into the final design, which we have seen evolve and improve through 5 various feedbacks following the leaseholders' liaison with local residents, Portsmouth City Council Planning Department. As an owner-occupier, the planning applicant has gone the extra mile to ensure that we have been kept fully informed, listened to, and takes the view it's not just there as a landlord, but as a future neighbour. To my second point, in addressing the whole building as a owner-occupier, the applicant has selected quality building materials, will be on site during the design, and the building for the whole, and he addresses the whole building, unlike the intentions of Shipland Estates or Longbow, who only focused on the development as a profit, ignoring the main design and fabric of the existing building. The whole building will be greatly improved, the building appearance, and we believe it significantly enhances the Grand Parade vista. It provides better size, building size and height balance between eastern and the western sides of Grand Parade. It restores the size and grandiose of the former York and Pier hotel building that previously occupied the site prior to World War II and the bomb damage of 1941. And the new planning application design is vastly superior to the current and existing planning permission design, which is hideous and at odds with the existing building structure and materials. And finally, the third point, it enhances the building in area. Well, I'd like to say about that Grand Parade is an eclectic mix of old and new properties with different styles of flats, terraces and houses. It reflects architectural change over time. Many properties have had balconies, verandas, roof terraces, roof extensions, and the latest new building in Battery Row dates back only recently to 2011. This planning application greatly adds to the quality and the continuing development of Old Portsmouth. Whilst Grand Parade is within the conservation area, it does not mean that change should be stopped, or that modern and historic design cannot coexist. High quality architectural design should be supported. Fontenoy House has no significant or special status and is in need of substantial refurbishment. The current and existing planning condition for a single-storey floor extension fails to meet the needs of the whole building. This new planning application takes an holistic look and approach to Fontenoy House, and it significantly enhances the quality of the building, and overall look is of a balanced Grand Parade.
Could you sum up, please? You've had your 6 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
So could you sum up? You've got a minute or so to sum up.
What I'd like to say in the final minute is, if you just look at the 4 pictures that I have on the back of the brief, we've listened to the criticisms. If I draw your attention to view 1, Fountain Court, you'll see that it has 5 floors, similar mansard roof and design, and how it currently dwarfs Fontenoy House, which is stuck on the corner. View 2, Lombard Court, which overlooks a cathedral, again 5 stories with mansard roof. And in terms of the criticism for the materials used, if you look at view 3, which is of the grammar school at the end of the high street, you'll see that it incorporates zinc, metal and brick fascia of modern up against new. And finally, just to show what was there previously, in terms of the York and Pier, there was an existing 5-floor building which was destroyed in 1941.
Thank you. Jason and Kate Phillips.
We'll try and go as fast as we can. Kate's going to hold up the photos which you can refer to as I'm speaking. Okay. Hello, we are Kate and Jason Phillips, the planning applicants. We have lived in Portsmouth since attending university here in 1988. We want to build our forever family home, and we are not property developers. We have spent over 2 years researching this project extensively. We hope to reinstate the balance, the gateway of Grand Parade, which was lost during World War II. We have listened to architects and local residents and investigated 16 different designs with the planning department. Our final proposal was selected, refined and welcomed by our planning officer and conservation officer in May 2018. As Anthony has said, Fontenoy House, in a state of disrepair, needs substantial refurbishment. It was described by the National Planning Inspectorate as bland and utilitarian. Currently, there is existing planning permission to build 2 single-storey, 2-bedroom apartments. This was submitted by a property developer looking to maximise profit and approved at appeal. It's a basic design and very similar to penthouses in Gunwharf Quays. Their proposal offered no improvement at all to the existing building. Effectively, the current approval drops 2 very average apartments onto the roof of a very tired-looking building. At appeal, it was felt this preserved the old Portsmouth conservation area. We agree it preserves, but it does not improve. We are looking to build 1 3-bedroom duplex apartment and considering the building as a whole, as it will be our home. Our proposal is much more interesting design and will use high quality weather resistant materials and will reinstate the grandeur, scale, mass of the original buildings which once formed the balanced gateway to Grand Parade. We will also completely renovate the existing building externally and internally to modern building standards and add a plaque to commemorate the York and Pier Hotel which was previously on the site. We will also add a lift for communal use, not just for the top floor as the property developers proposed, and Juliet balconies to existing flats. This will all be carried out at our cost, unlike the previous freehold owners. If the current approved scheme preserves the conservation area, surely our comprehensive complete building proposal enhances it. The Planning Department are recommending our proposals refused on 4 points. This report was written by the 6th person we were dealing with, who was on a 3-month contract and had limited knowledge. We met with her at the site of Fontenoy House a few months ago. She's now left. There are no comments regarding the poor state of the building. Surely the benefit of our comprehensive scheme has to be clear to anyone. It was applauded by the senior planners and officers we previously dealt with during May 2018. Our proposal offers a public benefit to improving a tied and planned building. Refusal point number 4. Regarding the special conservation areas of Portsmouth and Chichester, Langstone Harbours, this can be resolved by a financial contribution which has not been mentioned at any time. Refusal point 3. Odour and noise problems from the Wellington pub extraction system. The Planning Inspectorate didn't think this would be an issue at appeal. We have previously offered to help finance a new system that will remove cooking odours emanating from the pub. Refusal point 2 and 1, the main points, says our proposal's height, bulk, mass alteration to the facade would make the building visually intrusive to ancient monuments of the Square Tower and King's Bastion, and that it would be over-dominant and unsympathetic to nearby properties. It would neither preserve or enhance the character of Old Portsmouth and have no public benefit. We don't agree with the planners' points, nor did the previous senior planners we were dealing with. The planning committee minutes you have in front of you, page 24, are incorrect. They are based on an old level pre-planning application response. This refusal is based on incorrect information being used. The newer pre-application response, which was incorrectly dated 11th of April 18, but should have been 14th of June 18, from our meeting on the 31st of May 18, acknowledges that the principle of extending the property to provide 2 additional floors is acceptable, and that the Planning and Conservation Officer's choice of design option 4 would represent the least visually harmful proposal on the character and appearance of Old Portsmouth and the setting of the ancient monuments. At the meeting on 31st of May 18, the planning officers were very positive, as the letter reflects. They suggested some minor changes, all of which were implemented in the final design, and it was then submitted for planning approval. The latest response which should be used, this latest response should be used to determine our application. The Planning Inspectorate seems very different. In their report approving the current scheme, they wrote, the additional height of the proposal would be seen in context of the variety of height and styles of surrounding buildings. However, I do not consider that it would appear overly prominent, particularly as the overall height will still be less than that of number 60, the old bank. I appreciate that it would give rise to a change in appearance of the building, but in my view it would not adversely affect the setting of the listed buildings as heritage assets as a whole. I therefore conclude that the proposed extension would not be harmful to Old Portsmouth Conservation Area and it would be preserved. The Planning Inspectorate clearly states that the new development would not only not be overly prominent, as its height would be less than the old bank. Our proposal is still 3.53 metres lower than the old bank. It is lower than 4 other buildings in Grand Parade, lower than the previous buildings which stood on the site in 1941, and pretty much the same height as 3 other buildings on the other corner of the quadrant in Battery Row. 2 other buildings opposite have 5 full floors and a step-back 6th-floor roof room. We are proposing the current 3 full floors and a stepped-back mansard roof 4th floor, reflecting the old bank opposite, and a very stepped-back 5th floor mansard roof room, which is approximately 2/3 of the full floor area. If the current scheme preserves the Old Portsmouth Conservation Area, surely our scheme which renovates the complete building and offers the far higher quality design would enhance it. Historic England, on their reports, they didn't actually mention the King's Bastion or Long Curtain. They do say that the view will change. This is the first time we've ever applied for planning permission. To date, this has involved 7 different planning officials. We have swung from being very supported to not supported to very supported to not supported, and the lack of department policy and approval is based on individuals' perception. It shouldn't be like this. The current scheme received 0 support during the planning process and 0 support from Fontenoy residents, but was approved at Peel and Bristol. Our proposal has 39% support from local residents and support and no objections from Fontenoy residents. The final submission was completely okayed by planning and conservation officers, but we have always been flexible and open to new ideas to improve our potential new home. If the planning committee are supportive of the principle of what we are trying to do, we can definitely reconsider finishes, colours, materials in line with planning officer's suggestions, as we would love to move forward with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you for letting me speak today, Chair. I know that the better-looking Councillor Wood wanted to be here, but unfortunately he's out of the country. But I'm very grateful for his advice in preparing my deputation. My thanks to the officers for putting together such a comprehensive report on an application that has attracted so much public interest. There's a few things I particularly ask that you consider when deciding this application. I think it's particularly important with this application to consider not only the design, but the impact that it's going to have on the area surrounding the development. You all know that Old Portsmouth, and particularly Grand Parade, is one of the most beautiful parts of the city, and a development of this size is going to have a significant impact on the buildings and the community that surrounds it. I'd particularly like to call your attention to PCSC 23, which requires you, when considering applications like this, that they are to seek development that relates well to the geography and history of Portsmouth, particularly the city's conservation areas, and also that protection and enhancement of the city's historic townscape and its cultural and natural heritage, in particular its links to the sea. As you've heard earlier from local residents today, and their concerns about the impact of this design that it will have on the area and on the community, I don't believe that this application can meet the standards laid out in PCSE 23. I also think it's particularly important to ask you to consider this application not in relation to other buildings that already exist, or other plans that have been previously approved or rejected, or other plans that may have been considered and then weren't submitted, or other buildings that once existed on the site 50 years ago. But your responsibility, is to consider this application in relation to Portsmouth's planning policies, PCSE 23, and the natural planning guides, not other buildings, real or unreal. Therefore, I would ask that you follow the officer's recommendation and reject the application.
It is always the will of this committee to look at each case on its own merits. I have Councillor Vernon Jackson indicating.
Simon, can I ask, I did sit on the planning committee many years ago when this came forward for a single-storey extension, and I voted against it, and I need to come to this with an open mind. But that we were not successful in defending that refusal. This is for 2 stories, not just the 1 story. If the committee were minded to follow your advice and to refuse, would that be sustainable at appeal? Or Sim, if you want to, whoever.
Yeah, we would have not brought it to you if we didn't think that we would be able to defend this at appeal.
Chairman, I wanted to ask because I think it's important that if we don't do things here at committee just to make people happy or unhappy. It's got to be able to be defended because this is a quasi-judicial thing, and there's always the planning inspector at the sit behind. And just doing things to make people happy with us, but it's not going to be defended at appeal is very short term and gives people false hope when there is none. So thank you. That's very helpful.
Councillor Stubbs.
Yeah, in the CGIs, including the ones on the screen actually at the moment, for the existing building, it shows the windows appear to be very dark. They look like they're somehow dark glazing, and the brickwork for the existing building appears to be a different colour than it now is. So it looks quite orangey, much more so than on the building as it is. Is that accurate? Is that part of this application?
Thank you. You always have to be a little careful about representations. It might be one colour on one screen, it transforms slightly and you print it onto another or show it. So Actually, I think it's slightly clearer on my screen as it happens, Councillor. I can see a slight distinction. Don't rely 100% on what is in front of you in terms of detail, colour. If the application were approved, we would, of course, have a condition attached to get the approval of the materials, especially in such an important location. So there will be a detailed discussion with the applicants around the exact choice, not only of the brick, but also its bonding and the mortar striking as well, and all the other finishes. So don't be distracted by any slight variations or anything. It's not the final version.
And the thing, I'm imagining the brickwork will be sort of fundamentally the same as it is now, but the windows I'd like some further clarity on, because they do appear in what we have in front of us to be quite darkened and tinted.
Yes, sorry, you did mention the windows. Yes, they're white in the current building, and they are proposed to be a dark frame. Again, that will be the details of that will be for discussion, but it is indicated as a dark frame, no doubt to match other elements such as the fascia and the parapet and the zinc cladding at a high level.
Okay, so it's a dark frame, but the glass itself is just, I mean, it actually looks on the images that we've got like tinted glass, so am I assuming that's not the case?
I don't know. I doubt it would be tinted glass, but again, that would be a material for approval by the council.
Councillor Smythe.
I'd like to follow up on that and seek further clarification. I understood that in a conservation area, things like fenestration, colour and so forth were taken into account. And certainly the character of the area is for white framed windows. It's an area characterised by bright contrast with bright and white. I know it's very varied. You haven't mentioned that specifically in your report, the treatment of the existing walls there, but could that possibly be a further ground for refusal?
We did, it is buried away perhaps in certain places in the report, but there was a concern expressed about not only the main concern is about the addition at height of the massing of the 2 stories, but there was a concern about the new treatment of the building. There's always going to be a subjective view about proposed, in the applicant's views, improvements and modernisation of a building, and the decision makers, this committee's decision about whether or not that's right or desirable. So here we've got brick slips and the window fenestration and changes to balconies and so on. In the round there was a concern, more minor than the scale of the development, about the facade treatment of the existing.
Can I?
Certainly. Councillor Smythe.
Another question is, presumably it's the case that if we refuse this and that's held, then that we could face the situation of another application for a revised single-storey development on the top, and at that point, if we were minded to follow the recommendations of the inspector when they approved the 2 flats at the top, we would have a chance to look at those sorts of details. Is that correct? Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Mr. Chairman, the applicant, if I heard him right, he contested a paragraph in the report.
Correct.
Back on page 24.
24.
Where he said it wasn't accurate. I wonder if we could have the officer's comment on that. Top paragraph.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes. As a general principle, I hesitate to get too involved with the pre-application discussions, the ins and outs, because I am aware, the applicants will be more aware than I am, a relative newcomer to the development. There have been extensive discussions over a long period of time, which we would welcome, because we would prefer not to be in a position of conflict than accordance. So I don't have in front of me all the last details and all the dates, so I can't agree or disagree with the applicant's statement. What I would say is that ultimately I do believe officers did express some concern about a 2-storey development, but in any event, pre-application discussions are without prejudice, and so what actually counts is the application, the formal application that's made publicly, that members of the public, consultees comment on, officers and councillors will have their views upon, and what is determined. So ultimately what's in front of you, and it's your decision.
Well, whilst members are thinking, a question from the chairman. Page 23, alterations to existing elevations comprise brick slips to the existing brickwork at first and second floor. So what will the visual impact of these brick slips be? And was there any discussion of those at pre-application stage?
Councillor, without all of the pre-application information in front of me, I can't give you chapter and verse on the details around brick slips. I suspect if there was, it was very much secondary to the main proposals, the large proposals, the proposals that had the main concern of the extensions to the roof. So I don't know about the details of the brick slips during pre-application discussion. Were the application to be approved, we'd want to be absolutely assured about the quality of the materials. Brick slips are something that are perhaps used a little more often than they used to be in modern times, but again the quality is perhaps better than a few years ago. There are different systems of manufacture and construction, which is really important because with a less robust material, because they're thinner, that's really important in terms of weathering and robustness and quality, as well as the workmanship, to make sure that if some sort of brick slip system is used, it is a good solution that lasts well. So in the event of a consent or moving towards a recommendation for a consent, we'd certainly discuss that in more detail with the applicants prior to making a recommendation, and if it were approved as part of the detailed materials choice.
Councillor Hunt, you were indicating.
Yeah, for comments, I would like to.
Any more questions? Okay, comments, Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, I'd like to move the officer's report, the recommendation. I have listened very carefully. I've looked at these photographs here as well. But I've come to the view, having listened to all the evidence, that the proposed application does not relate well to the recipient building, but and I consider it to be planning creep, which is what I see it as. But I also look at PCS 23, and I have it in front of me. I bring my Bible with me all the time, and I've asked myself the questions on page 141, PCS 23. This is a conservation area as well, and I understand that there are other forms of development there too, but I may not agree with them, and I don't in many cases, but I don't have to add to it. I ask myself, is it of excellent architectural quality and the change to existing buildings, delight and innovation? It doesn't fit either of those two, it's contrary to that. And does the development relate well to the geography and history of Portsmouth, particularly the city's conservation area? It doesn't do that either, and that's reflected in the officer's recommendations. As so too is protection and enhancement of the city's historic townscape and its cultural and natural heritage. Again, it doesn't fit that either, it's contrary to that. As the appropriate scale, density, layout, appearance and materials, well, that's more subjective, but I don't think it does that either. So I'm not looking at this subjectively, in a subjective or an emotional way. I'm looking at whether it complies with the planning authority's policies, and I've come to the conclusion that it does not, for all the reasons described in the officer's report in PCS 23.
Thank you. Councillor, so you're proposing the officer's recommendation. Councillor Stubbs, then Councillor Vernon Jackson, then Councillor Smythe.
I think that the way, I'm getting the feeling that this application hasn't been well received, but I mean, for me, I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that. I mean, I couldn't support this as it stands today, but and I do think even matters like the windowing needs further work on it. I'm conscious that we already have an existing planning consent on this site, and I do wonder if there might be some form of further negotiation and discussion that can be had to come up with something which could receive committee support. So I'm thinking in terms of suggesting a deferral, I don't know how you want to handle this, Chair, because otherwise it'll take a bit of time to work out on what grounds. So I'm prepared to sort of hold back if you want to take the vote on refusal first before working out all the details on that.
So you would propose a deferral for further consideration to improve the plan which is in front of us? Yes?
Is that right? Deferral comes first in the vote, please. So. Oh, okay. There you go. I should have known that.
But you need a seconder.
I need a seconder for that, yeah.
We need seconders at the moment. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd be happy to propose, or second Councillor Hunt's suggestion of a refusal. I think that the applicants have clearly spent a great deal of time working this up, but we have to look at this not in terms of whoever anybody is, and it's great that this is going to be your home, but any planning application sits upon that piece of land, whoever it is who owns it. And we have to do it on that basis and that basis. So it's not in any way should it reflect on you, both either positively or negatively. We have to just look at the buildings. My feeling is if this has been an application for just one additional story, it would have gone through. But this isn't. This is pushing it to an additional 2 stories, not 1. And therefore I think the recommendations from the officers are correct, and that the massing is a significant issue. I would, taking as principle that it'll be 1 additional, not 2 additional stories, then there is work to be done with the planners to come back to that. But my personal view is that that is too big a change to be done as a part of a deferral. It is a new application in my view, and I think Sim is gently nodding, but I don't know what the view from the planning officers is. I was interested in the picture of Lombard Court, and I look at Lombard Court on one side, and then I look at Lombard Street, and I look at St Nicholas's Street on the other, and I have to say that Lombard Court does not add anything to that area. It is not a beautiful building, I'm very sorry to say, and if it was here for planning now, we'd have said no to it. There is an appeal decision that says there can be 1 extra story. That's something that needs to be worked through, and I'm sure that you could produce a way better scheme than the one that came back, but moving it from 1 extra story to 2 extra story is just that step too far, which is why I think I would support Lee's suggestion of a refusal.
Councillor Smythe and Councillor Jones.
I was going to second.
You were going to second. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much. This is a really tricky one, actually, because I really don't think that Fontenoy House is a very attractive building at all. And hindsight's a wonderful thing, and planning, like clothes, goes in fashions and styles, and it can be cyclical and it goes round in circles. And I'm sure of its time, that building probably was well, obviously some committee, some planning officer thought it was a good idea, but I don't think it's very attractive at all, and I think something happening to it would enhance that area. And it's interesting because before the pack was handed out by the applicants, I thought, I could, that building rendered white could look lovely and really make it stand out, or some colour other than that relatively cheap 1960s looking brick or whenever it was built. But then actually seeing the images that were given out and seeing it with the CGIs of it rendered white, it actually looked a bit, actually it didn't look as nice as I thought it would do. But I certainly agree that that building could be significantly enhanced. Obviously noting that there is already permission for a 1-storey extension on the roof for the 2 apartments. The big thing for me, it's probably because I quite like old buildings, but I quite like H in the drawings that have been sent around. I think it's been quite useful to see the journey that the applicants, architects, planning agent have gone on, and those curved edges I just thought really brought something new to the area. Having said that, I appreciate that the planning officer's concern on the local area is about, it's all listed there, but clearly around PC23, the design and the scale of the two-storey extension that is proposed. But Historic England are not objecting, and that is quite an issue, I think, around particularly PCS 23. I don't particularly like what's proposed with that grey, but again, it's very personal because I prefer older buildings, so, I do appreciate new buildings can have some amazing architectural merits, but that kind of grey, the way, that kind of cladding side to it, I don't know, I think it's quite imposing. So as it is at the moment, I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but I think something should be done to the building. However, if we refuse this today, because of Historic England, because of their position, I think we're in grave danger of losing this appeal. I'll just put it out there, by the way, because I'm not sure that it's just my own personal opinion. I mean, I'm not a professional, but my take on this is that I think a planning inspectorate will look at that and think, well, Natural England aren't worried about Point Battery and about the Square Tower, but I have obviously read the report and note what our own conservation officers have said, and quite rightly, Historic England have referred that it should be our conservation officers that do that. So I don't really like how it's proposed, but I like the concept of having something on there. So yeah, it is a difficult one, and yeah, I think the applicants, a deferral for the applicants may not be helpful. They may prefer a refusal if they're thinking of going to appeal and chancing their arm anyway. Who knows?
Members, following that, I must remind you that you are the people who make your judgments, and you make your judgments on what is before you, not on any speculation of how the planning inspectorate might or might not react to any appeal which might be made were we to refuse this. Councillor Udi.
Thank you for coming here today, and it's lots of evidence, but honestly it's taught me quite a lot. I think one of the disadvantages of the building is that it was built in the 1950s and everything else completely predates it, which puts you at a massive disadvantage. I agree with Councillor Jones's comments about something has to happen to that building, but I just don't think it's this design. I think maybe to go back to your previous permission and work something around that. I feel like your correspondence you might have had with officers might have not just been that great, and you could have had better advice, definitely, because I feel like there is something that definitely can be done, especially if you did something around the old permission, if you still wanted to make something for yourselves, but maybe take the black out of it, definitely. But other than that, the second story does irk me a bit, but if you look over the road, there is a bit of a second story bit on there as well, but I think it's the colour, and I feel like it doesn't add to the idea. So it would be under PCS 23 obviously, but I will be refusing on that. But I feel like this isn't something you should just drop. You should just keep at it and maybe come back another time with a new permission for something else.
Right, members, we have to take first a proposal for the officer's recommendation for refusal. Can I see those who are in favour of the recommendation to refuse? Those against that recommendation? Those abstaining? The planning application is therefore refused, but I would point out that there have been considerable expressions of interest in the way in which the applicants, in the general opinion of the committee, it would seem, have suggested that this is a great improvement on in many respects, on the application which we turned down some years ago. But nonetheless, we do not feel that this, in the light of PCS 23, meets our requirements, and so it has been refused. Thank you very much to all people who have made deputations. I would now like to ask for a recess of 10 minutes to allow people to A, have a smoke, B, have a coffee, and C, to use the facilities.
Chairman, my apologies, I need to be elsewhere at past.
Well, in which case you'll not have enough time to have a 10-minute recess and come back. So
That
thank
is
you very
true,
much, Councillor
Chairman.
Vernon Jackson. Councillor... Yeah. Councillor Hunt, I believe you are also have to leave for another meeting. Thank you. We now come to item 3 on the agenda, 42 Bewley Road, Portsmouth, change of use from dwelling house C3 to Class C4. Can I have Mr. McGee and Nuria Perez Alcantara to the table, please? Okay. I'll let you both come. Right. Thanks. Can I have the officer's report on this one, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Before I start, I would like to draw your attention to the supplementary matters. Condition 3 of the recommended permission stating that the premises shall not be occupied by more than 4 persons is to be removed. It is noted that the property as a C3 residential dwelling could be occupied by multiple persons, and a C4 allows an occupation of up to 6 persons. Therefore, it would be unreasonable to limit this permission to 4 people. The proposal is for a change of use from dwelling house class C3 to purposes C4, which is a house full of multiple occupation, or C3 dwelling house. The application site is a 2-storey mid-terrace property. The surrounding area is residential, comprising a dense group of terrace properties. The property is set back by a forecourt, which could be used for refuse storage. Starting with the ground floor layout, the existing ground floor comprises a living room, dining room, WC and kitchen. This application proposes internal alterations to create 1 number bedroom, creating the existing living room and dining room. The living room would remain as existing. Bedroom 4 would be created by an internal partition between the existing living room and dining room. The WC would remain unchanged, as with the kitchen. The garden area. The first floor would remain unchanged in terms of its layout. It has also been confirmed by the applicant that each bedroom would only accommodate 1 person. Bedroom 1, bedroom 2, upstairs bathroom, and bedroom 3. Based on the information held by the City Council of the 82 properties within a 50-metre radius of the application site, there were 2 properties identified as HMOs. Whilst this is the best information available to the local planning authority and is updated on a regular basis, there are occasions where properties have been included or omitted from the database in error or have been lawfully changed their use away from C4 HMOs without requiring the express permission of the LPA. To conclude, the percentage including the application site would be 3.7%, which would still be lower than the 10% threshold. A second strand policy introduced in July 2018 seeks to ensure that the amenity of the standard of living environment for the neighbours and local occupiers is protected. Paragraph 1.22a states, an application for HMO development would be deemed to be failing to protect the amenity and the provision of a good standard of living environment for the neighbouring and local occupiers where granting the application would result in 3 or more HMOs being adjacent to each other, or granting the application would result in any residential property of a C3 use being sandwiched between 2 HMOs. The proposed development would not result in 3 or more Class 4 HMOs being adjacent to each other, nor would it result in any residential property Class C3 being sandwiched between 2 HMOs. It is therefore concluded that the proposed change of use would not result in an imbalance between HMOs and C3 dwellings in the prescribed area. Having regards to all material considerations raised, representations and planning policy, it is concluded that the development is acceptable.
Right, thank you. We come to deputations. Mr. McGee, you have 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chairman. My name's Daniel McGee. I'm resident of 25 Bewley Road. I've been resident there with my wife since February 2002. There's been a continual deterioration in the parking in the area, as we're all aware, in Portsmouth. But this particular road has been a farm-like road, although I believe the radius of HMOs there seemed to indicate there were 2 HMOs in the road, which we're not aware of. But as far as we're aware, the road is mainly family orientated homes. And this would be, well, to our knowledge, would have been the first HMO in the road, and therefore obviously set a precedent for which we are not very happy. The report is detailed. There were 22 objections, which I believe is a third, almost exactly a third of the households in there. I think there's 66 households in Beaulieu Road. So a third took the objection to this change to HMO. The notion that the number of people could go up to 6 is obviously news to me today, although I obviously read it in the report, although I believe that there's been confirmation that only one person will be allocated one bedroom should it be approved, which would maximise 4 people in the accommodation. Which really brings me to the one matter, really to the well-being of the people in the street with regards to parking. Parking is a problem. At least 3 people, including myself, have had their cars scored in parking on the Barnum Road, out with our own road, by people who obviously objected to us parking in their area. And over the years, I've myself stopped at least 2 or 3 fights with regards to parking between neighbours. There's already preferential parking going on, where parking cars are being, if there are spaces for 2 parking spaces and outside a home that has 2 cars, one resident will park in the middle of the 2 spaces, killing the second space, and waiting on the second occupant to return and obtain the second space. This is prevalent in several families, even in our street, our road. So if there, as I say, there are 66 houses. Last night at 10:45, I checked in the street. There were 69 parked vehicles in the street, including 14 commercial vehicles and 2 motorcycles. As far as I'm aware, there are only 7 non-vehicle owned households in the street. So essentially there is 1 parking space per household in the street. So adding another 4 people in the house seems to go against the highway matters as reported, that off-road parking facilities for the new developments in cities would be a requirement of 2 off-road spaces for a Class 4 C4 HMOs with 4+ bedrooms. There are not 2 off-road parking spaces in our street. The only other thing really that I can again look towards the well-being of the street. Already your resident has had some visitors that have disturbed, and in fact myself on one occasion at 3:13 about 10 days ago was disturbed by 2 visitors to the residence. The reason I know, although I live in 25, which is some distance from 42, the chap had obviously forgotten his phone, and as he was running back to his car, informed the female that he was with that the occupant lived at number 42. About an hour later, they came back and almost stopped outside our window once again to make a phone call to a fast food store to let them know that they wanted kebabs of some sort. Basically, people do not realise that having a telephone conversation outside someone's house at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning can be heard by multiple houses up and down the street, as well as myself being awakened. I'm sure there were several other people. So essentially, I'm asking the committee to consider the well-being of the residents. On this occasion, the family that were in, the family left the accommodation, the household originally because they could not park. Two working members of the family with 3 children. They worked separate shifts. They couldn't accommodate the children and shopping, etc., with parking off-street. Myself, although redundant at the moment recently, as an engineer for 5.5 years, I returned home at 6:30, and I've often had to park, unfortunately, up at Mayfield School, which is a topic of conversation today. And as far south as the the cemetery and further south onto Copler Road on several occasions over the years. And certainly for the past 5 years, I've rarely got parking in the street on my return at 6:30 in the evening.
If you could conclude.
Okay, so really, and just in respect of the fact that all the objections have been overruled effectively in the report, I'm just begging the committee to consider the well-being of the residents. If not for this particular application, then certainly in respect of this as a precursor for any future applications, it is something that I think has been driven by the lack of a landlord accommodation, available accommodation in the city centre due to the increase in university accommodation. They've been driven out into the city exactly as I saw in Leicester 20 years ago, and I left Leicester for a similar reason. We couldn't get decent accommodation within the city centre. And here we are today in Portsmouth. Hopefully they will return as Leicester did to a good situation as they are today.
Thank you.
In the future.
Which of you is speaking? Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew. Thank you for organising this committee meeting today, Chairman and Councillors. This is my colleague Nuria. So, with regards to this property, 42 Bewley Road, just to give you an overview, it's a 3-bedroom house with 2 separate reception rooms. So what we're looking to do is apply for planning permission, supported by the HMO department, to use one of the reception rooms as a 4th bedroom. All of these bedrooms will only be allowed for professionals only. So similar to, student houses, normally they come, student houses, they normally come
Hi, hello. Just wanted to highlight, we understand parking is the big issue in the area. As Andrew said, we have another property and none of them has a car. 2 of them has a bike and the others just take the transport, the public transport. So sometimes I think if the house is for a family, most of the families now have 2 cars, which can be even worse. And then the second thing I wanted to highlight is that the planning officer is happy with the house. We comply with all the minimal requirements. It's under the 10% of HMOs in the 50 meters radius. The size of the rooms is above the minimum, and the condition and decoration of the property we think is good standards. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Members' questions? Councillor Jones.
Is this a retrospective application? Because the house looks like it's already been divided, and the applicants just said that there are 2 that cycle and 2 that don't, and no one has a car, which means there are 4 people referred to for this property. Okay.
Sorry. Councillor Stubbs.
Yeah, the planning officer removed a condition restricting the number of occupants to 4, saying that can't be justified because C4 usage goes all the way to 6 people. However, surely because the room standards and the amount of communal space is dependent upon the number of people in the building, and that you have, the 7.5 metre room standard only applies to single occupation. I could see how you could get to 5 insofar as bedroom, one of them, bedroom 1. Looks like it's over the double room standard, so I can see how you could say, well, that could be 2, and then the others could be 1, and that adds up to 5. So why have you suggested removing the condition?
Councillor, I do apologise. It was my mistake, Councillor. I got ahead of myself and was confused with the larger HMOs where we have done that. But the basic problem with the condition as proposed there, or now rescinded by proposal, is as we set out in the SMAT report. The dwelling as it is could have any number of family-related individuals in it, whereas a C4 consent is up to 6. So we wouldn't want to be giving a consent for up to 6 on the one hand, and then taking that away on the other by way of condition. So I apologise, it was my error. I shouldn't have put it in there in the first place.
Right, so I'm a little confused by that, not just in terms of this application, but in terms of other applications down the line. So you're saying that we can never impose that condition on a condition on those lines on C4 properties, but we could do on larger ones? Yeah. Okay.
So you're looking at the use class C4, which is defined under the use classes order of 1987 as an HMO for occupation between 3 to 6 persons. So for you to then impose a condition that actually constrains further that Parliament given limit of occupation isn't defensible. With the sui generis, because that being Latin for of its own kind, there's a need there to limit the level of occupation of the HMO. In other words, the Parliament has done the limit for you in this case.
Okay, but let's say we had a different application. We had 3 rooms, which were 7.5, 7.5 and 7.5. Then you couldn't really say, well, 6 people can live in that.
But if it's to be occupied by 3 to 6 persons, that would be a C4 planning use. And it would be a licensing matter, perhaps, for the actual sufficiency of the areas.
That limits our SPD somewhat, because our SPD is based upon room standards for single and double, and yet you're telling me that in fact, at least from the planning side of this, that single rooms could be legitimately used as double, provided it doesn't take the total number of occupants in the building to over 6, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yes, that's correct. From a planning perspective, as I say, licensing is a separate regime that might have something different to say.
Councillor Udi.
Chair, the applicant just said that they had some photos, and I said I'd wait for you to know that they want to pass some photos around.
Any photograph which you pass around becomes the property of the committee.
Sure. Okay.
Councillor Jonas.
Just as an observation, Chairman, we're speaking about the occupancy. It looks to me like each bedroom shows a double bed. I know that doesn't mean you've got to have two in there, but just an observation.
I would find difficulty in recasting that as a question. Any further questions? Comments of members? Councillor Jonas.
As I've not sat on for a couple of months, how does the nitrate thing affect this, or doesn't it?
Mr. Manley?
When we're looking at nitrates, we look at basically netting out against an existing use. Now, this has an overnight stay, but a C4 occupation would generate no more nitrates than its existing lawful use as a C3 residential unit. So having it won't generate additional nitrates, and therefore it's not considered to cause an additional problem to the nitrates issue that's now being encountered in Solent.
Comments, members? Well, since no member has made a comment, it is normal for the chairman to then make the proposal, and I would propose the officer's recommendation for permission on the grounds that this meets the City Council's requirements for houses in multiple occupation. It does not overburden the area with houses in multiple occupation. And as an aside comment, that we have had many of these where we have been more concerned, overturned by Her Majesty's Planning Inspectorate, although this is not a consideration which should underlie our decision. But it should certainly inform our thinking. So I propose the officer's recommendation. I do not need a seconder for that, since it comes from the chair. Are there any other proposals? No? Well, I put it to you that the officer's recommendation for approval. Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. You have your planning permission. We now move on to 13 Lower Drayton Lane. Can I have Mr. David Everett at the table, please? Can I have the officer's report, please, on 13 Lower Drayton Lane?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This application relates to a two-storey mid-terrace property situated on the east side of Lower Drayton Lane. The surrounding area is residential and is characterised by a variety of terraced and semi-detached properties. This application seeks planning permission for a single-storey extension to the rear following demolition of an existing conservatory. The dwelling is set back from the highway with a paved parking area forward of the dwelling. The property benefits from a large enclosed garden to the rear. Boundary treatments consist of a brick wall and closed board fencing. To the rear of the garden is a detached garage with access to a shared driveway leading from Chilgrove Road. The existing ground floor layout comprises of a lounge, kitchen and dining room with a conservatory to the rear. This application seeks to replace a conservatory with a larger extension to create a family living and dining area. There are no site-specific land use policies that discourage the principle of residential extensions in this area. Therefore, the design policy PCS 23 of the Portsmouth Plan is the most relevant in this case. The extension would measure 4 metres in depth, 3.5 metres in width, and would have a maximum height of 3.4 metres. The extension would have a similar roof form to existing rear projection, and proposed building materials would include render and slate roof tiles to match the existing. The extension would have a depth of 1.8 metres greater than the existing conservatory. With regards to any impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties, the extension would be situated approximately 2.5 metres from the boundary shared with 15 Lower Drayton Lane, and would be largely screened by an existing rear projection belonging to the host dwelling. With regards to the neighbouring property to the north of the site, the proposed extension would be situated approximately 0.1 metres from the neighbouring property, 11 Lower Drayton Lane. It should be noted that an application for a single-storey road extension relating to this site was refused in March earlier this year. The application was refused on the grounds that the extension would have a harmful impact on the amenities of the occupiers of 11 Lower Drayton Lane in terms of outlook and loss of light. However, to address this reason of refusal, the depth of the extension being proposed has been reduced by 1 metre, from 5 metres to 4 metres. Following amendments to this proposal during the course of this application, which reduced the height of the extension by 0.4 metres, the extension would have a maximum height of 3.4 metres and eaves height of 2.2 metres. This would project approximately 1.8 metres beyond the rear elevation of 11 Lower Drayton Lane. Having regard to the reduced depth and modest height of the proposed extension and the good sized back gardens, it is considered that the extension would not result in a significant loss of light or outlook to the occupiers of the neighbouring property, and the previous reason for refusal is considered to have been addressed. All other matters for consideration have been outlined in the officer report. Having regard to all material considerations, raised representations and planning policy, it is concluded that the development is capable of officer support.
Mr. Everett, you have 6 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is David Everett. I live at number 11 Lower Drayton Lane, which is 0.1 metres away from the proposed extension. I'd like to thank the Planning Committee for allowing me to voice my family's objections to this application in person. I've no issues with anyone wanting to improve their living conditions. My neighbours have made several improvements to their house over the last 3 years with no objections from our household. However, the proposed construction of the single-storey extension to the south-east proximity of our property will have a detrimental effect on the outlook and living environment of our household, hence our objection to the application. When my wife and I bought our property in 2003, it was in need of upgrading and a lot of TLC. But the one thing we liked was the knock-through lounge diner that allowed light into our living space from morning through to evening. When the first letter arrived, advising us of the application in January of this year, we were sitting by our sunroom at the eastern end of the property and the sun was streaming through the windows. I looked at the plans and I said to my wife, you can wave goodbye to that site forever if the extension next door is approved, along with a significant reduction in light. The original application was refused on the grounds it would be detrimental to the amenities of the occupiers of number 11, i.e. us, in terms of loss of light, increased sense of enclosure and overshadowing. The consequential impact on my household of the new proposed structure still maintains all of the above reasons for refusal of the original application. 0.4 metres of lower roof height still blocks out the sun during the winter months when light is at a premium. Not one person, neighbours, architect, planning officer or ward councillors have come round to our house and have sat in the chairs where my family sit to actually view the impact that this proposed structure will have to our living environment. And I did invite the ward councillors. We do not believe that due consideration has been undertaken in the application process. We have to challenge the conclusion in the report that the proposed extension would not harm the amenities of neighbouring properties, particularly number 11, because it certainly will affect ours. The plans show that the sunroom will be significantly overshadowed by the extension. And if you could go back to the, keep going. No, sorry, to the elevation. Bottom left-hand corner, adjacent conservatory, dotted line, that's us. Proposed extension, that's number 13. So, we are requesting that the Planning Committee gives due thought and consideration to our objections and overturns the recommendation of conditional approval to this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Jonas.
My question to the officers is, how much larger is this than would it be under permitted development?
So I've had a look into the history of the site, and the site does have its permitted development rights still intact, and so they could do a rear extension of 3 metres depth under permitted development.
So just how much bigger is it then?
So it's 1 metre bigger than what they could
And
achieve under
height?
permitted development. It's actually lower. They could do a maximum height of 4 metres under permitted development, eaves height of 3 metres.
But it is a metre longer.
Metre deeper, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Could you put the image back up with the one that the gentleman just referred to with a dotted line? I'll ask the planning officer, but it might be that we need to refer to the neighbour. Is number 11 to the south or the north of number 13? I'm just trying to work out how much of an impact the sun moving over from east to west will have, and if you were south, obviously it would be less impactful, but obviously it will be more impactful if the property, if number 13 is south of it, which it is. Yeah. Okay. So this house here is the proposed one, and the house here is this gentleman's.
Yeah. So this is the application site where the extension will be going. This is number 11. The extension will be just coming, just shake your hand, underneath the windowsill.
And coming out to roughly where that red canopy is?
For about, there's 1.8 metres, so approximately around there.
Councillor Smythe.
Thank you. Can we go back to the elevation that shows that one? Yes. Has any consideration been given in the course of discussions about this to changing the roof line of the extension?
The roof has been reduced in height during the course of this application, but the actual pitch of the roof hasn't been considered.
I mean, you could gain some light by taking a straight line across. Has that been considered?
A flat roof hasn't been considered.
Yes, I didn't mean a flat roof. I mean have I not explained myself very well? If you took the line from the wall to the edge of the guttering, that would reduce the height.
It's a monopitch.
Yes, I understand that too. More than one person's got a thing on. Sorry, I'm afraid I don't understand the answer to the question.
The question, I think, is whether a monopitch roof without the flat element in it,
yes,
but you having the same height, had been considered in the pre-application discussions.
Thank you, Chair.
Again, it's one of these, the situation where the application is in response to a previous refusal. This scheme is the one that's in front of us to be determined. So, obviously, they felt they've responded to the previous refusal. They've come in with a scheme, and this is the one that we are required to determine because that's the one in front of us. So, obviously, the issue of an alternative roof plan or pitch is not something that we can consider.
Councillor Jonas.
So just to correct me if I'm wrong, the original proposal was for a metre longer than the one they put in for, but it's still a metre over what you would have agreed to in the first place. That you wouldn't have had to put it to here for determination, yes? So the person then is chancing his arm by saying, well, right then, you turned me down for 2 metres more than I could have, I'm going to go for 1. But it's still not right, is it?
What we were talking about was permitted development rights. So the reason they've put the application in is because it's more than permitted development rights would allow. They've obviously come out further. we've looked at that and considered it was unacceptable and it was refused. They've come in with one that's reduced. Obviously, it's for members to consider as to whether or not they think that the extension as being proposed is acceptable or not. The officers looked at it and considered that it's acceptable in this instance, but it's for you to make a decision as to whether or not you agree with that officer's recommendation or not.
As a follow-up to that then, when we say permitted, we actually don't mean permitted. We mean, you know, put in what you like and then we might consider it. But permitted to me means permitted.
Permitted would mean, surely, that they did not have to get planning consent for that. They could merely inform the planning authority that that was what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in on that as well. The General Permitted Development Order 2015 gives a national grant of planning permission to undertake small extensions within particular dimensions. So when we say it's permitted, it's going back to my point previously. Actually, it's something that Parliament's permitted before it gets to a local planning authority. We don't have any, well, aside from putting in Article 4 directions, we can't remove people's permitted development rights. As Hannah, at the beginning of the presentation, said this property has its permitted development rights intact, and that is a fallback position, is that they could use permitted development rights. But that is distinct from the subsequent refusal for planning permission that has also been considered by this local planning authority. Yeah.
Comments, members? Councillor Smythe.
Just another comment. I think, a comment here. Well, I do think we need to take into account the height of the existing fence, which is pretty high here. So the actual percentage, the amount of, yeah, you can see well in that. But this is a difficult decision. You can understand very well the concerns of people who live next door and will lose light.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much. I think it's a bit too much, I have to be honest. I know there's been some work done on the roof and it's been scaled back from the previous refusal. But I do think that is going to be a very large extension for a house of that width and height. And I think it will have, I do believe it will have a detrimental effect on next door. Yes, there is a fence there at the moment which blocks the light for 2/3 of the height, but that extra bit I think will also have an effect. So I'm going to propose a refusal, and I guess that will have to be on in 30 seconds. Well, it'll have to be on PCS 23 unless you advise me that you think there's any other relevant policy based on that reason. But it is very much on the effect of the neighbours. I think I could probably live with how it looks in comparison to the house itself if you took everyone else away. Yeah, I still think it'll be quite big on the back of it, but you know, I think I'd get around that. I think it's probably mostly the impact on the neighbours for me. That I do think I'll have an effect on the next door neighbours. Yeah, I hope it'll be fair.
You're proposing refusal.
Yeah.
Mr. Manley, your finger is on the button.
Yeah, I was going to say actually, on page 46 of the report, it does actually list the previous reason for refusal, which may help in you forming your considerations to overturn the go against the officer's
A and B
recommendation.
definitely.
So,
C and D, I'm not even sure they're substantial reasons
no,
really, but
top
certainly
of the page. Top of that's the actual reason for refusal. The reason for refusal
policy,
previously.
where it says policy context.
Oh,
This
it would be-
application was refused on grounds that the extension would be detrimental to the amenity of the occupiers of number 11 in terms of loss of outlook and light, increased sense of enclosure and overshadowing. Would you continue with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Udi has seconded that. Are there any other proposals? Those in favour of Councillor Jones's proposal for refusal, please show. That is unanimous. The application is refused. Would Mr. Haunt and Mr. McManus please come to the table? Members, we're now dealing with the issue of a retrospective application for retention of outbuilding to rear of garden at 12 Glenthorne Road, Portsmouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start my presentation, I'd just like to draw your attention, councillors, to the supplementary matter report, which includes the following update. An additional comment has been received from Network Rail. The comment requires the applicant to comply with the advice given by Network Rail to ensure the safe operations of the railway and protection of Network Rail's adjoining land. The comment addresses matters such as an encroachment onto Network Rail land, future maintenance, landscaping and drainage. This application relates to a two-storey end-of-terrace property situated on the east side of Glenthorne Road. Retrospective planning permission is sought for a detached outbuilding to the rear of the property. The dwelling is set back from the highway by a small front garden. The surrounding area is residential and is characterised by rows of terrace properties of similar size and design. To the rear of the dwelling is an enclosed garden. Boundary treatment consists of closed-bore fencing and mature vegetation. The outbuilding measures 4.3 metres in depth, 3.6 metres in width, and would have a maximum height of 3.68 metres. Materials include red cedar cladding and black felt roof tiles. Once completed, the outbuilding would be used for accommodation and ancillary to the main house. Some plans here of the north elevation, east elevation, west elevation, and there's a floor plan. There are no site-specific land use policies that discourage the principle of residential extensions and outbuildings in this area. Therefore, the design policy, PCS 23 of the Portsmouth Plan, is the most relevant in this case. The outbuilding is situated approximately 10 metres from the host dwelling. This distance and the single-storey height of the outbuilding would ensure the development is subservient to the dwelling. There are a number of outbuildings on the site, however the site is considered to be of an adequate size to accommodate the outbuildings. The outbuilding would be visible from Burfield Road to the south of the site and from the train line to the east of the site. However, there are a number of outbuilding extensions to properties within the vicinity of the site. Therefore, having regard to the existing character of the area, the outbuilding is not considered to form an inappropriate form of development, which would be harmful to the character of the area. There is no residential development further to the east of the site which would be affected by the development. As mentioned previously, Network Rail were consulted on the application, and an additional comment has been submitted which requires the applicant to comply with the advice given by Network Rail. With regards to any impact on neighbouring amenity, at its closest point, the outbuilding is situated approximately 13 metres from the rear elevation of 14 Glenthorne Road. This is considered to be an acceptable distance so as not to be affected by the development. With regards to the neighbouring property to the south of the site, the outbuilding is situated approximately 0.4 metres from the boundary shared with 10 Glenthorne Road. Rear elevation of 10 Glenthorne Road is approximately 9 metres from the outbuilding. It is noted that there are windows to the south elevation of the outbuilding. However, the windows are largely blocked by the boundary fence and an outbuilding belonging to 10 Glenthorne Road. It is therefore considered that there will be no material overlooking. All other matters for consideration have been outlined in the officer report. Having regard to all material considerations, raised representations and planning policy, it is concluded that the development is acceptable and capable of officer support.
Thank you. Mr. McManus, you have 6 minutes to speak, and then Mr. Haunt, you have the same amount of time.
Good afternoon. My wife and I have lived at number 10 Glenthorne Road for the past 28 years. One thing that attracted us to this property was the open aspect to the rear of the property, and knowing there will be no building going on subject to the because there's a railway line there. Most of our time is spent in the dining room. This gives us a good view of the garden, the background, open surroundings. In 1918, my neighbour at number 12 constructed a building, which I assume was to house a hot tub in. This I feel should have also had planning permission. But as it did not interfere with us, I did not pursue this issue. However, earlier this year, my neighbour constructed a much larger building, resulting in this planning application being made after I complained to my neighbour in Portsmouth Council. My objection to this planning application is purely on the height of the building. You can cover his garden over for all I care, as long as the height don't come up. It's taken a certain amount of our open aspect we enjoyed over the years. If this construction, which is less than half a metre from the boundary, had been put to its normal thing of a maximum height of 2.5 metres, there would have been no problem and planning permission would not have been required. There's one person who supported this construction. This person cannot see this construction. He lives on the corner of Buffield Road and Glenthorne Road, but has been involved in the construction of this building concern. Finally, I would like to point out this construction is a pleasure and not an essential. So if planning permission is approved, then it makes a mockery of garden building guidelines. Thank you.
Mr. Haunt? Right hand side, yeah.
Hello everyone. With respect to Mr. McManus, I had no intention of upsetting him originally. I built this for my daughter, who has extreme anxiety and depressive issues, and when we talked about this at CAMS, she was very excited, and that's why I started building it, and I was blessed by my neighbour, Dave, with the materials to build. Now, when I originally set out to build this, I looked up the information on the government website, and basically it just read out that, sorry, I don't know if you want to pass that along. This is basically what came up on the government website. So I was pointed out when the planner visited that it was wrong. It was only giving me half the story, so I'll stick my hand up there. Perhaps I should have gone into a different website. Yeah, basically that's the government website there. Basically it stipulated that it was a 2.5 metres eaves height, no more than 4 metres, but it states it within a 2 metre boundary. It doesn't tell me that within a 2 metre boundary the maximum height is 2.5 without planning permission. Hence why when he did tell me, I did apply for planning permission. I did offer Mr. McManus around to talk about it, and I did lower it originally by 2 feet. We cut it down by 2 feet, so it sits actually now on top of the windows. It's as far as down as I could get it to go. The actual eaves are actually coming over the top of the window frame, so I couldn't go any further down, which took it down to 3.6 metres. As for the issue where it's looking over the window, for a couple of months now, actually since the beginning of July, I obscured these windows with what they call rabbit goo. It's it's very pretty sort of covering that basically lets light in through in different colours, but it completely obscures any view over to the neighbour's garden. I did that out of respect for Mr. McManus and any issues he might have. I was basically quite. I've tried to appease the situation. I didn't want a feud over it, but it's just ended up this way. As for it's not, I noticed it was read that it's for accommodation. It's not for accommodation if that means living in. Basically, this is for my daughter's use. And that's basically about it, really. I can't think of anything else.
Thank you very much. Members, questions? Well, a question from the chair whilst you're thinking. Could you tell us, advise us on the import of the additional information we have from the railway?
Thank you, Councillor. It's just standard advice. We're required to consult Network Rail for developments within, I think, 10 metres of Network Rail land. And on any development, we tend to get what is standard advice, which simply deals with, as I simply deals with matters of safety, essentially, drainage, stability of the railway line, encroachment, maintenance, all those sorts of things. Network Rail properly responsible and want to make sure that proposed development doesn't affect those matters. So it is, as I've said, standard guidance that typically would not relate to a planning condition, and so typically, as we've said, we would pass it on to the applicant. I note in this case, of course, the development's happened, so some of those elements could be passed, if you like, for example, construction and land stability, but I wouldn't have thought that was a problem with a limited structure of this site, this sort. I don't know what the foundations are, if anything, or it's just on concrete paving slabs. But without being dismissive, I wouldn't have thought that the fact that it's already there is a problem. It is a small structure. I'm not sure the distance away from the back boundary. So it's for belt and braces informative matters. But in terms of the future, any maintenance, for example, you wouldn't expect to need a crane or anything else that would encroach onto the Network Rail land. So I don't think there's a difficulty in that area.
So short of a most peculiar form of landslip, it is unlikely to be of any import. Thank you. Councillor Jonas.
Just to clarify, from the last picture we saw from Mr. McManus's garden, what was the building at the bottom of his garden? Was it a garage or just a shed or a...
I believe it's a shed. Mr. McManus might want to correct me, but...
Conservatory shed, and to the right is a small garage.
Yeah.
Which, if you look at conservatory, you can just see how high it is. And Mr. Gaunt's shed there, you can see it by the side of the conservatory.
So there is a garage.
Sorry?
There is a garage.
Yeah, I've got a small garage, you can still get a power in there. It was built in 1935.
You can just see it there.
Okay.
Bring back the Austin 7.
Any further questions, members? Councillor Horton.
You know the photo, can you go back to that last photo we saw there? So the building there, is that before or after the reduction in the roof height? In the height?
That's after.
That's after, so that's what it looks like now?
No, well, the tarpaulin, sorry. The
The tar-
tarpaulin is blowing out, makes it look a little bit fluffy. It's actually got... it's actually got some weather felt, the underfelt, what do you call it? Goes underneath tiles, basically. It's the new...
Yeah.
Felt. Yeah.
Yeah. But it is that, okay, so that's it having been reduced, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Any further questions, members? Comments, members?
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor New.
Thank you, Chair. I would be inclined to move the officer's recommendation for conditional permission. There's not much of a view back there anyway of the railway line and what's over there. I think it's a very admirable thing that's been done for someone's daughter. It's a shame that it's come to committee this way round, but as the officer said, I don't think it has any bearing on whether it's granted permission or not. I don't think it's contentious.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Horton, second. Are there any other comments or proposals? No, thank you. We have the officer's recommendation proposed and seconded. Can I see members, do you in favour? That is unanimous. Mr. Hunt, you have your retrospective planning permission. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. McManus and Mr. Hunt, for your deputation.
Chairman, I've got to go, I'm sorry. I have to be somewhere in 20 minutes.
We will remain quiet, so thanks very much for your attendance. Members, we now come to the final application, which is for construction of a part single-storey, part two-storey rear extension to 13 Boston Road, Portsmouth, after removal of existing rear extension. We have no deputation on this, so can I have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This application relates to a two-storey semi-detached dwelling that is located within a primarily residential area. The property is located on the western side of Boston Road and is located on ground that slopes down north to south. Planning permission is sought for the construction of a part single-storey, part two-storey rear extension following the removal of an existing rear extension. The ground floor aspect of the development would measure 2.7 metres in height, 5 metres in width and 6.2 metres in depth. The ground floor would feature one side-facing window of an obscure glazed and a set of bifold doors to its rear. The first floor aspect would be separated from the common boundary to the north by an approximate distance of 1.5 metres. The proposed first floor extension would measure 3.3 metres in depth, 3.5 metres in width and 6.6 metres in height, and would feature one rear window that would serve a bedroom. While the ground floor extension would have a significant mass, it wouldn't be substantially larger than the existing rear projection at the property, and the proposed first floor aspect of the development is considered to relate well to the existing dwelling due to its harmonious roof form, its set down from the main ridge and its subservient width, so not the full width of the property. Further, the development would use materials to match the existing dwelling and is considered to blend well with the existing property. While the neighbouring property to the south, number 11 Boston Road, you can see on the right there, is located downhill from the application site, is also separated from the proposed development by an approximate distance of 3 metres. This distance is considered to be sufficient to negate any significant impact upon this neighbour through a loss of light or a sensitive enclosure. The proposal also includes one side-facing window at ground floor level, which would overlook the site. However, as mentioned, this would be an obscure glazed and conditioned as such. The neighbouring property to the north, number 15 Boston Road, that you can see to the left there, has an existing single-storey rear extension to the same depth as the proposed, and therefore it's not considered that the ground floor extension would impact upon the neighbour through a loss of light or sensitive enclosure. And in addition to this, the neighbouring dwelling also features a skylight within this existing single-storey rear projection that is situated about 1.5 metres away from the common boundary, so roughly 3 metres away from the proposed first floor rear extension. So given this distance and given the existing side and rear windows that are on the property that serve the same space, it is not considered that the proposed development would impact this neighbour through a loss of light or a sensitive enclosure to any significant degree. And it also, number 15 Boston Road also features one first floor rear window, as you can see to the bottom left there, that serves a bedroom. This window is sited also around about 1.5 metres away from the common boundary, so also about 3 metres away from the proposed development. So given the location of this window and the proposed location of the development, this distance is considered to be sufficient that the proposal wouldn't have any major impact for a loss of light or outlook to this window. And that's a close-up there. And the proposed development is therefore considered to be suitable in both its design and its impact upon residential amenity, and is therefore in accordance with the Portsmouth Plan. Thank you.
Members' questions? Councillor Jonas.
Just for the officer to confirm that number 15's extension is virtually identical to what number 13's planning.
Yes, I can confirm that
Thank
for
you.
a better photo. If you look just to the right there, you can see they're both end there, and the proposed extension wouldn't go any further than what's existing there.
Comments? Councillor Jonas.
I'd like to put forward the acceptance of the officer's recommendations on this application, Chairman.
Councillor Stubbs.
A second.
Any further comments? Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Planning permission is granted. That concludes the planning applications. Thank you very much, members, for the courtesy which you have shown to the chair. So, hang on. Sorry? Whoops, I've
Missed one.
13.
Yeah, the fourth one was deferred. Sorry.
Right. 4 was deferred. Thank you for the courtesy you've shown to the chair. Good evening. Thank you.
So who's the proposal second?
Sorry? For that one,